Good afternoon, America. It's 2 o'clock on the East Coast. Still morning on that West Coast. Welcome to RSBN Live as we have a news alert for you via Truth Social. President Trump stating that this makes Washington look like small potatoes. According to Victor Davis Hanson, the senior fellow over at the Hoover Institution, they are caught irrefutable evidence. They should all go to jail or it will never stop. Nobody will believe the evidence, which is overwhelming. Make America great again, as President Trump continues to do every single day. I'm Robert McNeely. It's always a joy to be with you here at RSBN's live desk as we await the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing to hold on Biden's border betrayal. And we know that it's either incompetence by Alejandro Mayorkas and the Autopen's comrades, or it was something more insidious. So we look forward to seeing that Senate subcommittee hearing on this very important issue that's brought millions into the country. We know borders are. Tom Homan stating that we need to remove 7,000 illegal aliens per day to make up for all of the people that came over the open southern border just 1 year ago today. 1 year ago and 1 day, 366 days in fact, when the Autopen exited the presidential election. And then the fix was in to endorse Kamala Harris, his failed border czar, the former vice president and now private resident of the Golden State of California. We hope it stays that way. As President Trump meeting this morning with the president of the Philippines and stating on Truth Social all of the great successes with President Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines is just leaving the White House with all of his many representatives. It was a beautiful visit, and we concluded our trade deal, whereby the Philippines is going to open market with the United States and zero tariffs. And just like Indonesia, the Philippines will pay a 19% tariff. In addition, we will work together militarily. It was a great honor to be with the president. He is highly respected in his country, as he should be. He is also a very good and tough negotiator. We extend our warmest regards to the wonderful people of the Philippines and so many Filipino Americans calling the United States home right here stateside. So a joyous meeting between the two leaders, as we do have video recap and footage of that meeting from the Oval Office, as President Trump was joined by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also the Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, his Chief of Staff, and Stephen Miller, among many other officials in our cabinet right here in the United States and Filipino counterparts in the Oval Office for your viewing pleasure.
It's a great honor to have President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. of the Philippines, a great family legacy, and highly respected in this country. I know that because I have many friends in the Philippines, and there's great respect, or I couldn't say it, so congratulations. We're going to be talking about trade. We're going to be talking about war and peace. They're a very important nation militarily, and we've had some great drills lately. We're back with them. I think I can say that the last administration was not getting along with them too well. They didn't get along with anybody. They didn't know. Honestly, they didn't know what they were doing. But we have some fantastic military relationships with the Philippines, and that's been reinstituted. And Pete, I would say that you couldn't be happier, right, with the relationship. So I just want to say it's an honor to have you. We're going to talk about trade today, and we're very close to finishing a trade deal, big trade deal actually. And we do a lot of business with you. It's a lot of income coming in for both groups. But I was surprised to see the kind of numbers. They're very big. And they're going to get bigger under what we're doing and what we're proposing. And I just want to thank you for being with us. It's a great honor. You and your representative. It's really a great, great honor.
And during that meeting, President Trump outlining what DNI Secretary Tulsi Gabbard spoke of on this spider web of influence, from the Steele dossier to Crossfire Hurricane. If you remember Russia, the hoax that was used to usurp the power and the authority of not only the first term of the executive office of the President of the United States, but to duly remove this citizen president, Donald John Trump. And it goes as far up as Barack Hussein Obama, and it is much, much worse than Watergate. Watergate looking like child's play compared to this, but as we watch everything with Brennan and Comey, the former Autopen, also Barack Hussein Obama at the top of all this, with crooked Hillary Clinton at the helm of this plan to take down Donald Trump, we know that U.S. steel industry is back under Donald Trump's leadership, and that the Biden-era stranglehold is plagued by unfair competition, job losses, and weakened national security, had losses, and imports flooding the market and domestic production stalled. The steel industry is quickly roaring back to life under President Donald Trump's leadership and protective tariffs that are keys to revitalizing American manufacturing. Just look at these last two trade deals with Indonesia and now the Philippines. We don't have to pay them tariffs. They need to pay 19% to get into our market. And it will help their citizenry, in turn their residents. And we want that to happen. Free and fair trade. Something that the last 25 years of neocon and neoliberal American foreign policy sought to help everyone else abroad while bankrupting places like Detroit. It's good that we have factories being built at a faster rate than China does right now. It in turn weakens the Communist Party that seeks worldwide dominance as the new Soviet Union of the 21st century. But under President Trump's watch and his negotiation skills, he mentioned in that meeting that he will be likely meeting with Chinese Premier Xi Jinping in China in the near future. And this is all on the heels of another trip overseas to Scotland, the United Kingdom, upcoming this weekend for President Trump, July 25th through 29th. So be sure to tune into Right Side Broadcasting Network Live for all of that coverage as we await the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee meeting and hearing to hold on Biden's border betrayal. Thank you to our sponsors on the right side of history, mypillow.com/RSBN. The free shipping sale, the My Cross going for 50% off right now, half off. It's the cross that Mike Lindell wears, a male and female version for you at home. My Pillow bed sheets going for as low as $24.98, and the multi-use My Pillow 2.0 now $9.98. Those are the pillows that say, "In God we trust." The pillows that also say, "God has control." Also, just the plain colors, pink, white, gray, even the red, white, and blue, whatever you would like. I mean, that's better than a lunch deal out there. $9.98 for these pillows that will change your sleep pattern. I know the My Pillow 1.0 helped me a lot. I can't wait to order my My Pillow 2.0. Call today, don't delay. With over 2,000 products, 800-836-7566. MyPillow.com/RSBN. It is your go-to for all things sleep and rest, so as you can have a good day the next day with Mike Lindell at the helm, making it all in the great state of Minnesota. Thank you for his sponsorship here on the right side of history. And Kalshi.com/RSBN. Trade on the most important questions facing the United States and the world. Will Elon Musk create that third party, the American party? Who will President Trump pardon this year? Will the Los Angeles Dodgers repeat the World Series championship? Those and more. Trade on anything, bet on anything over at Kalshi.com/RSBN. As we had a very special guest just yesterday to talk on a plethora of different issues facing this 24/7 news cycle. You are familiar with him, Jim Paff, the president of the Conservative Caucus. Please enjoy our conversation as we await the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on Biden's border betrayal. And we are joined by Jim Paff of the Conservative Caucus, president, in fact, of this fine organization and a regular contributor here to RSBN. Jim, thank you for joining us as so much is happening around the world, and most recently the Israeli strikes now actually hitting a Catholic church in Gaza, causing controversy. We have Ambassador Mike Huckabee asking for transparency on this, as well as the potential strife between President Trump and Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu as a result. Where do you see all of this going in the last few hours?
Yeah, no, it's causing major problems, I think, for Israel when it comes to Gaza. Listen, I've been supportive of their efforts to take down Hamas in Gaza. I think they do have a right to do that, but you cannot make mistakes like this. It's like throwing someone into a den of serpents and trying to avoid getting bitten. It's almost impossible to do, obviously. And I don't know that that you're going to see Donald Trump abandoning Netanyahu, but I can guarantee you there's serious discussions in the background that where the Trump administration is saying, you better get your act together, and it could be the beginning of a path to radically transforming what Israel's doing in Gaza. And they've got enough controversy as it is, mostly caused by Hamas that puts innocent people into harm's way of very serious military targets. So it's not like that Hamas is the good guys here and Israel's the bad guys. But when you're doing this sort of thing, it's really crazy, and it was a clear violation and a clearly bad situation that Israel should have been able to keep from happening after all the strikes that they have been undertaking in Gaza to begin with.
It shows you the peace through strength efforts, the America First policies of this president. There's a lot of gray, not just black and white, and amazing to see what he inherited from the Otto Penn administration that arguably led to October 7th of 2023, with Russia as well invading Ukraine. Now 3.5 years of that ongoing. NATO has now purchased these Patriot missiles in order to protect Ukraine. Do you think that President Putin will finally come to the table and be forthright with President Trump? And according to President Trump just last week, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, really has not been saying he wants peace, but then will strike certain targets within Ukraine. He now has less than 50 days to come to the table, or there will be 100% secondary tariffs that are reciprocal on the Russian empire.
And that's the path that you most want to take is secondary tariffs, where you urge countries that if they're going to have a real problem if they do trade with Russia. I think that could potentially be an effective thing, but Vladimir Putin has shown himself to be rather intransigent here. That doesn't clear Zelensky, who very early on, if the Biden administration and also the UK had not stopped him from making a negotiated peace with Russia early on, that could have stemmed the tide of what was already a bad situation that's gotten much worse. But I think that Vladimir Putin seems to be digging his heels in further, and he's got some degree of flexibility to do so, even with attempts of these secondary tariffs. It's still not going to necessarily, in the short run, destroy the economy, although it might harm it. So we'll see how it plays out. I don't know how effective the secondary tariffs are going to be, but if they can be effective, it just may get things back in line. And Donald Trump's shown himself to be very able in taking these dark situations and putting light on them, turning them into something good.
Yes, and he's been committed to the saving of lives and stopping the killing, as he's put it. And now some other news that legacy items might not touch on. The Japanese ruling party, that class, actually losing power in its upper chamber recently. How will that have a stem and an effect on the Western world? And we see these ripples effects of the world just being a smaller place now, thanks to technology and thanks to different abilities to get across the globe. But do you find anything there that might have an effect on continued negotiations with tariffs with that great nation of Japan?
Well, it disrupts those negotiations somewhat. We'll see how poorly they get down into the dumps, or if there's something that can be pulled out here. But you've got the changing of a current political way of thinking that's going to be radically transformed, because it is a sharp change in policy strategy that's got to get worked out, because that new administration in Japan is going to be more focused on getting its legs in terms of how it's planning on governing here in the future. That probably puts tariff negotiations a little bit off to the side. We'll see how effective Trump can be, but it's going to be a totally different way of thinking, and that adjustment is not always easy to make.
And President Trump now has an upcoming trip to the UK and specifically Scotland over the course of the next few days. What do you see coming about from this? Because he's had two great new trade deals with the UK Prime Minister Starmer, and that most recently being signed in Alberta, Canada during the G7 summit. Do you think any more developments between our two nations will come in the form of free and fair trade?
Well, it actually will kind of help solidify the deal that's been made. And these things are always negotiable, and Great Britain has a history with the United States that has historically been very positive. So you can always look for potentially new and better trade negotiations with them. And again, they took a little bit of a hit after Brexit because it was a very slow moving effort to get a new trade deal with us and with the EU. So they've suffered somewhat economically, but you got a more complicated factor in that Keir Starmer is really guiding a radical leftist administration in the UK that it doesn't have a good sense of what free trade can do. And so obviously going over there again helps solidify what's happened, and we'll see where it goes from there. They do have elections coming up too, and so that kind of is a factor in all this that, again, can stall or enhance those negotiations moving forward, depending on what Keir Starmer is willing to do. And he hasn't been shown to be willing to do too much.
And do you think with the UK independence movement, specifically that party that's come into power with several seats that have been in the parliament, but still very small considering the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, among others, that really take up a lot of the power apparatus in the United Kingdom. Do you think someone like a Nigel Farage does have a chance to serve as Prime Minister? He was successful with that Brexit movement, but can that translate into further elected office, as he once served in the UK Parliament and also the European Parliament when the United Kingdom was a member of the European Union?
It seems difficult for Farage to win, and I'm not an expert on UK politics, but I do follow it. He was up in the polls for a time, and that's changed. And you got to have momentum going into an election, and I, at least at the moment, don't see that momentum continuing as strongly, but it's going to have a major impact on how they govern in that country. Farage seems like a capable guy, and he certainly is committed to free market economics and reducing the kinds of aggressive attempts to censor people in that country. If it's going to depend upon how much the UK people are willing to change that. Starmer has worked really hard to try to change his message, as any politician does, and of course he'll betray the people of Great Britain if he gets back, or if he remains in the post. But that's really the only hope, is for Nigel Farage to be able to make the case that he can provide a better alternative. The other aspect in these elections is the perception in parliamentary systems, is the perception of the people that if Farage makes large gains, can he put a government together? And where's that going to come from? The Conservative Party does not like Nigel Farage at all. And so we have seen precedent both in Germany and in France where conservative parties were willing to shun the gains of when I say the traditional conservative parties have been willing to shun the gains of the more far-right parties because they just weren't going to have anything to do with them, and then end up moving with the labor leftist parties to avoid those conservative parties maintaining gains. That dynamic could play out in Great Britain if Farage has massive gains. So it's really up in the air what's going to end up happening. And Starmer, at least by the polls, seems to have moderated the negative perception of labor there in the UK. So it's anybody's guess how that's going to play out right now.
And it's all fascinating to watch because, as you stated earlier, it all depends upon these different movements because it could renegotiate all of these different crucial trade deals as we approach the 2026 midterms. So as we come back stateside, lots breaking this weekend with Tulsi Gabbard, the DNI chief at Intelligence, really seeming to piece together this spider web of Barack Hussein Obama, the auto pen, and who knew what when with Crossfire Hurricane and Russiagate. What are some of your thoughts on what looks like it could be treason at the highest levels?
I think treason is on the table, and that seems really extreme to say, but there is no doubt that a coup was being put together as early as July of 2016. Interestingly, because they apparently knew internally that Donald Trump did have a chance to win, even though the polls seemed to say at that time and almost to election day that it was impossible. Of course, many of us knew that it was very possible for Trump to pull this out because of the angst in the American public at the time, which obviously played out. But listen, one of the people not often discussed when it comes to the Russia hoax and the Crossfire Hurricane effort is Barack Obama. He's been actually very effective at keeping himself out of the limelight when in reality he was a major player in that. And I've been saying this for years, ever since all that rolled up, and a lot of people have just not bitten on that. They haven't looked closely into Barack Obama, who probably was something of a shadow government behind Joe Biden, because there were clear stories of people going to his home in Washington, D.C. from the Biden administration, and there obviously were discussions being had. It wasn't just merely a cordial, hey, I just want to stop by and have coffee if you have time. No, Obama's been behind the scenes doing a whole lot. This whole effort to take down Donald Trump was driven by him with the help of the John Brennans and James Comeys and James Clappers and Susan Rices of the world, who were intent upon harming Donald Trump, but evidenced by what actually played out. This is a long time coming. And I was actually kind of amazed when I saw some people on social media saying about Barack Obama, you can't arrest a former president. And I'm sitting here saying, what are you talking about? We just went through that in 2024. You can do that. They're going to have evidence, obviously, to be able to make this case before a grand jury, but they're going to have a favorable grand jury in Florida, it looks like, who will actually listen to this case rationally. I do believe an aggressive prosecution needs to be undertaken by all the players involved, including Barack Obama, because it's clear that we have been living with many of the aspects of what happens in third world dictatorships with our intelligence agencies and the so-called deep state in Washington, D.C. ever since that time. Barack Obama, as a community organizer, which he's always liked to call himself, built a system in Washington, D.C. that can effectively undermine the American political system. It actually has, and Donald Trump's right to point that out, having happened in 2020, not just with the Hunter Biden laptop, but many other things that took place. This is something that needs to be clearly looked at. What Tulsi Gabbard rolled out shows a very clear smoking gun, and actually evidence of the gun having been shot beyond that. And so this is something that needs to be aggressively undertaken, because if we do not break down this system and have people pay a price for what they did, it's just going to rear its ugly head again after Donald Trump's gone in 2028. Just like the famed Greek Hydra, which, you cut off its head and it just grows back. You're going to need a Medusa's head to turn it into stone, to follow the analogy, if you don't want this to get worse in the future, in fact. And so let's hope that they're successful at it, because with success comes freedom for the American people.
And we've seen that as well with Tulsi Gabbard's career, leaving Congress and then leaving the Democrat Party as she pursued the 2020 Democrat nomination against Kamala Harris, really calling her out on the busing issue from when she was the DA in San Francisco, but in turn, someone who was targeted by the Clintons and by the Biden Department of Justice, and it's remarkable how many people were either in jail or investigated by these entities who are now serving in our government, like gentleman Peter Navarro as well, who had to go through that. But aptly putting it, Jim, that President Trump went through this lawfare himself. So we'll see where all that leads, including a big story, too, with the ongoing saga of the Epstein files. And now President Trump ordering the DOJ to release all credible information, including Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is now going to the courts to have some of this released and the appropriate information where it can be. Where do you see all this leading?
Well, I think it does lead to some transparency, which we need, but it also gives Donald Trump the ability to focus on the things that he really is trying to focus on. One of the stories we're not hearing about through this mess, and I think Donald Trump's right to criticize it, is we're not talking every day about the successes of the Trump administration, which are quite deep and so far very successful 6 months in. There's a whole list of things that he's done that really have got this country going back on track. And if we can continue that effort over the next 3.5 years of his presidency, it could be a real renaissance for American freedom. It's not going to solve every problem, but I think we're on the track of getting rid of some of the worst things. You know, it's really amazing what Joe Biden attempted to do. When you point out to the fact that they went after Tulsi Gabbard, they went after people in this administration who are now on the front. By the way, don't forget, they went after RFK too, who are now on the front lines of policy in the Trump administration. These are people who know exactly what needs to be done. They have the experience and intelligence to deal with those things. They have so far been very successful. It's one of those things where something gets so bad that you have an opportunity to fix it because everything gets revealed. As I was saying in 2016, you know, for people who are so upset about Donald Trump for whatever reason, I said, if the guy becomes president, he's going to turn over the trash cans in Washington, D.C. and reveal what's really going on. I had, by that time, spent many years working on Capitol Hill, and everyone knows and has known forever how bad Washington, D.C. is. In fact, I was just watching over the weekend a little bit of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Mm-hmm. Even back in the 30s, they knew how bad that Washington, D.C. could be. It was less consequential back then. It's much more consequential now. But people didn't have a sense of truly how bad it is. Everyone thinks it's because Donald Trump is bombastic and in your face and rough and gruff. That's not the reason why we hate Washington, D.C. so badly. It's because of fundamentally what Washington, D.C. had become and is in many ways still. And we're seeing some very good successes so far in the initial stages of the Trump presidency. If we keep on this track, as I've already said, it will truly be a renaissance. We might be able to get back to some degree of normalcy that hopefully future presidents can, and Republican presidents likely, can pick up the ball on and run forward. So that the precedent will be set. The tables have been set, and now is the opportunity to take the gains that we've had and move forward. Donald Trump is still in that process, and I couldn't be more happy about it.
And at the time of this recording, Monday afternoon, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is speaking on just such matters, Jim, with Barack Obama's alleged manufactured Russian collusion hoax and much, much more. But also, to your point, we're now 6 months and 1 day in to this golden era of what can be something truly remarkable come the end of President Trump's term set for January 20th of 2029. What are your top takes from the successes over the past 6 months?
Well, first of all, even though I did have some misgivings with the big, beautiful bill, that is a huge, huge thing. Tax policy is now permanent in Washington, D.C. It has not been permanent for more than 20 years, really 30 plus years, because politicians like to give a tax cut to try to win an election, typically Republican politicians, but there's always a sunset to it so that they can have a big brouhaha and raise a lot of money. That's off the table now in terms of income taxes. That policy is set. A future Congress will literally have to raise taxes through a vote if they want to change that. So that's been very positive. What Tom Homan is doing with immigration enforcement is phenomenal. And in fact, I think Tom Homan is the greatest story of the Trump administration. There are a lot of great people in the administration. Marco Rubio, Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, just keep naming them. Lee Zeldin over at EPA. I mean, it's a great cabinet, and I'm very pleased with it. But what Tom Homan is doing is exactly what the American people want. It's been effective. Now he's going to have the money to bring it completely to fruition. And we just had this incident in New York over the weekend. Tom Homan is on top of that. We keep having highlights of how bad the Democrats have made this country when it came to immigration. So that's another success. The firing of federal employees, we've had nearly 2,000 come out of the State Department, which that is a thing that can be gutted because there's so many deep staters there. Lee Zeldin's doing firings in EPA, and EPA is just a scoundrel organization. We've had USAID nearly eliminated in this country. It wasn't entirely eliminated yet, but it was gutted with this rescission bill. And Marco Rubio has done some gutting as well since he's now over USAID. That's been a fantastic success. And we can name many, many others. There are some great highlights of what Donald Trump's been able to do. And it's been helpful for the American people. All the executive orders. I mean, he's rolled back so many problems in the executive branch and the constant reduction of regulations that continues to happen. This gives us an opportunity to turn this country back around again and hopefully make it permanent moving into the future. Now that the American people know how bad it can get when you allow someone like Joe Biden to become president, I think it's very unlikely they're going to be willing to go through that again, and they certainly are not fooled.
Yes, I would concur that the American people definitely awake and paying attention to what's happening right here stateside and abroad. Jim Paff, president of the Conservative Caucus, always a joy to have your expertise on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks so much. Talk to you soon, my friend.
Always great having Jim's commentary and analysis. He's an expert. He worked on Capitol Hill for countless years, knows the inside and the outside of the Beltway like the back of his hand, and always a joy to speak with him on the several issues facing your government that you put into place on November 5th. Thank you to our sponsors, mypillow.com/RSBN, the free shipping sale, the MyCross going for half off now, MyPillow bed sheets for as low as $24.98, and the multi-use MyPillow 2.0, various colors and themes, all for $9.98. That's likely better than the lunch deal down the street from your office right now. Call today, don't delay, 800-836-7566. Support Mr. Mike Lindell and Right Side Broadcasting Network by going to mypillow.com/RSBN. Save with code RSBN. Easy to remember. With over 2,000 products, this gentleman defending free speech, protecting election integrity, and making great products in America in the Minnesota factories and manufacturing plants of mypillow.com/RSBN. Thank you to Mike Lindell. If you like what you see here at Right Side Broadcasting Network, we are not the legacy media. We are citizen journalists, anchors, hosts, great writers here at the network, producers and directors committed to you, the American people. We were known as the Rally Network for a decade. We are now a live desk, bringing you unbridled access to your government inside and outside of the Beltway. So feel free to support us right here at Right Side Broadcasting Network. You could do that by visiting rsbnetwork.com/donate or texting RSBN to 801-801. We also have a great address to mail a check to at 1550. That's 1550 Opelika Road, Suite 6. P.O. Box 344 in the loveliest village on the plains. That's Auburn, Alabama, 36830. 1550 15550. Oh, excuse me, there, 1550. I added a 5 because I was excited about this great address. And that's Suite 6, Box 344, Auburn, Alabama, 36830. As you see some great shots there from the campaign trail last year. Can you imagine 6 months into this amazing administration on top of an entire year-end day when the auto pen dropped out of the presidential race? It was a historic one for sure, a great comeback by the 45th and now 47th President of the United States as we await a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing holding Biden's border betrayal accountable. We know that the auto pen administration opened up this border wall in a way that it was never done before. In fact, Tom Homan, the border czar, who's doing a great job at his position, stated that 7,000 illegal aliens have to be removed per day from this nation in order to rid the country of the millions that came in thanks to the auto pen administration. But this is on the heels of President Trump's rebound with the steel industry here in America, which is not only good for high class, middle class, good paying jobs here in this nation, but also for national security. Ohio-based Cleveland Cliffs announced record steel shipments in Q2 of this year. The CEO stating that Cliffs is a major supplier of steel to the United States automotive manufacturers. And the Trump administration continues to show strong support to both domestic steel and the domestic automotive sectors. We have impact that tariffs have been making a huge difference across the board for domestic jobs and national security. We expect this trend to continue, promoting the resurgence of the American automotive industry, a thriving domestic and international organization and industry. Indiana-based Steel Dynamics saw a 39% increase in operating income and a 19% increase in adjusted EBITDA in Q2 of this year. North Carolina-based Nucor expects its Q2 earnings to be approximately 4 times higher than the preceding quarter. And President Trump's perpetual golden share as part of the investment in the Pittsburgh-based U.S. Steel Products, the iconic American company's financial infrastructure and health ensures its jobs cannot be exported. It's a win-win for American workers, for blue-collar jobs, and for those American-based companies. We've also seen great victories across the board for MAGA over the course of the last week, from a new NATO deal to a faith luncheon last week, $90 billion in the energy AI sector. In fact, $92 billion plus, as President Trump visited last week at the invitation of Senator Dave McCormick of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to talk to CEOs, CFOs, union leaders, and also great bipartisan government officials, the state, local, federal levels, all for the Commonwealth to have not only nuclear energy, but drill, baby drill, and also artificial intelligence infrastructure for domestic and international security. Now, also inviting the Crown Prince and Prime Minister of Bahrain to the White House, as we saw today, the President of the Philippines visiting for a new great trade deal to be in place for the United States and for the great people of Indonesia. Inflation is down. We have a strong border. No crossings over the course of the last month. Maha ice cream. Isn't it great that you will actually get ice cream and not chemicals in that said ice cream anymore? CocaCola. They'll put real cane sugar into their soft drinks once again. Now, the original ingredient, Coca-Cola, that won't be in there, and that's a good thing. But Real cane sugar at least will replace that high fructose corn syrup that has led to cancers and led to increased diabetes, and it's just simply unhealthy for you. I mean, I was having a conversation with actually a friend's wife about how she'll clean the house using Coca-Cola and how efficient it is to scrub in the bathroom. Think about that. If you're using that to scrub a natural ingredient with the artificial ingredients, that it will actually take off soap scum from your bathroom. Imagine what it does to your stomach lining. So nice to see that Coca-Cola going back to some original ingredients. The Genius Act, President Trump signing into law and aptly saying in the East Room, they named it after me. Always good to get a chuckle or two surrounding this very serious business. Also, $9 billion in rescission packages to defund NPR and PBS because they have programming that was state-run media that would be either against the administration or simply talking about Drag Queen Story Hour, all funded by you, the American people. It's not the Sesame Street that I grew up with. And talk about Oscar the Grouch. Talk about the Oscar the Transgender Grouch. It was disgusting what they were putting out on PBS for children's entertainment. Leave the kids alone. Let them be children. Let them learn. And regardless if it's transgender or homosexual or heterosexual, whatever it might be, let kids be kids, for crying out loud. And if you see any of that nonsense within your school board meetings, please let us know. You can write to us here at the network, feedback@rsbn.tv. A great way to let us know what's going on in your neck of the woods so we can shed light on the darkness that is sometimes out there and the cockroaches that like to hide under the rocks. We turn them over here at Right Side Broadcasting Network, as we're thrilled that President Trump ordered for the DOJ to seek what can be put out there through court injunctions and the releasing of documents from specific judges regarding the Epstein files. We'll remain on that story and on that case, as it's serious to everyone. It's very bipartisan. And we've asked here at the network, why have demon rat leaders sat idly by for 4 years during the auto pen? Where was Merrick Garland, the former Attorney General, on this very issue when it came to a so-called list? We know that Alan Dershowitz, a very highly respected liberal Democrat, in fact voted for Joe Biden, the auto pen, but did represent President Trump during the lawfare and the fake impeachment hearings for the Constitution because he believes deeply in it, stating that he's seen this so-called list and that no one in the current administration is named on said list. So we'll stay on this, see what we can find here on the right side of history. And in case you miss any of our broadcasts, well, it's great we stream, so you can go back and scrub back to those on your favorite social media site, but please like, share, and subscribe across X, to YouTube, Rumble, whatever it is your favorite. You can also read the written word by many of our outstanding writers here at Right Side Broadcasting Network's live desk by going to rsbnetwork.com/newsletter to dive into many great articles. Personally, I love the Sunday devotional that I like to read before going off to church. And we also remember the memory over the course of the last week losing the great John MacArthur, a pastor out west who took on many great debates with so-called leaders in this nation, including Governor Newsom way back when he was San Francisco mayor, and talking about a number of different issues from a biblical perspective that did shape our Constitution. So God rest John MacArthur, a great man. We have the Senate Majority Leader, John Thun, speaking, and we could take it there live for your viewing pleasure.
Afternoon, everyone. We're doing something this week in the Senate that is a bit unusual, that we haven't done in a while. We're actually teeing up an appropriations bill to vote on the floor and have an amendment process. We're going to try and get consent. We're going to be on the Milcon VA legislative appropriations bill, and then hoping that we can get consent to add a couple of other bills into the package so that we can be voting on appropriations bills for the first time in a long time. And the reason I say that is because, as you all know, last year when Chuck Schumer was running the Senate, the Appropriations Committee reported out 11 of the 12 appropriations committees, or appropriations bills, I should say, all with bipartisan support, and not a single one of them was put on the floor for a vote. So we're fixing to change that. We think that there ought to be a regular appropriations process around here. The Democrats have indicated, because they're so upset over the rescissions bill last week, which, by the way, cut 0.1% of all federal spending, that somehow they can use that as an excuse to shut down the appropriations process and therefore shut down the government. We think that would be a big mistake, and hopefully they will think better of it and work with us. And we're trying to give them what they've been asking for, is a bipartisan appropriations process, which, frankly, I think a lot of us around here think is long overdue. The other thing I want to mention quickly is the nominations process. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversations around that here lately. And the thing that strikes me, again, about the Democrats' behavior relative to nominations is a little data point. And that data point is that President Trump will be the first president in history not to have a single one of his nominees confirmed either by voice vote or unanimous consent, which is typically what happens around here, particularly with nominees that have pretty broad bipartisan support, which a lot of these nominees that we're trying to advance do. So this is clearly an attempt to block and delay and obstruct. It is an example of Trump derangement syndrome on steroids. And it's unfortunate because there are a lot of people out there who've been nominated to positions, and positions in our government that frankly need to be filled. They're important positions that need to be filled, and the Democrats continue to try and delay and obstruct. So we're going to keep grinding and work as hard as we can on the Republican side if we're not going to get any cooperation from the Democrats to get the president's team in place.
Do you expect to cut short the August recess in order to, on the president's request, process these nominations? And the difficulty you're facing on appropriations, it looks like it's going to be a meat grinder to get the 60 votes you need on each of these bills. Are we looking at another CR situation in September?
Well, I would say that's going to be, I think, largely up to the Democrats. I hope we can get 60 votes, yes. It's not easy around here getting 60 votes on anything, but we've said before that if there's anything in the Senate that ought to be bipartisan, it's the appropriations process and getting back to regular order on that. So we'll see where the votes are. At this point, I'm hesitant to predict that. And with respect to the August recess, that really is a function of, again, whether or not the Democrats are willing to cooperate and help us get some of these nominees through the pipeline. So we're keeping those options on the table, honestly, because there's just a lot of stuff we have to get done.
As you know, Republicans are deeply divided over Jeffrey Epstein. Speaker Johnson shut down the House Florida. We're dealing with it. What do you think the Senate should do here, especially now that the Oversight Committee in the House subpoenaed or wants to Ghislaine Maxwell? Well,
I've said this before, and I will defer to our committee chairs. But as a personal matter, I've said this, I believe that the President and the Attorney General will make the right decisions there with regard to that. But again, if we have committee chairs who think it makes sense, then I'll leave that to their discretion.
What do you say to some of your members who now want new parts of the big beautiful bill, such as the Medicaid cuts or the gambling tax? Is that going to happen?
No. The big beautiful bill, and once we get an opportunity to get out there and talk about it, I think is going to be a big winner with the American people. And there are component parts of it that are, I think they're going to be hugely popular. And as I've said before, the target of this was middle-income families, working Americans, and I think they are going to be the biggest beneficiaries of the benefits of this bill. And I think we're going to have an opportunity, hopefully, to get out and start talking about it. Their views on that are going to be, I think our views on that are going to be confirmed by what the American people think. So, but on that particular issue, there are members out there who are saying we'd like to do this or that differently. That's always the case. This was a big piece of legislation that had a lot of moving parts. Not everybody got everything they wanted, but at the end of the day, it's historic in its breadth and the things that it addresses, from border security to national security to energy dominance to tax relief for working families to historic savings in terms of the budget reforms that we made, those are all things that are long overdue. And I think those things are all, in the end, as we get out there to talk about it, are going to be very popular with the American people.
Realistically, is the sanctions bill that Graham has likely to get a vote before recess, given all these nominations and other things that you guys have?
It would be, it's as you can tell, and I've said this before, but the coin of the realm in the Senate is floor time. There's a finite amount of it, and obviously it takes a lot of time to do anything around here, which we're going to find out now when we try to move on the appropriations process, and the nominations are also a very high priority for us. But Russia's sanctions, when it's ready to go, with the right bipartisan support, which I think exists, there are 85 co-sponsors on that bill, we ought to be able to expedite consideration of that on the floor. And I'm ready to do that. Again, we're working, trying to coordinate with the White House to ensure that when we do it at a time that makes sense in terms of their negotiations to try and facilitate a peaceful outcome with respect to Ukraine and Russia. So it's on our radar screen, and when it's time to go, we'll be ready to go. Thank you all.
Are you committed to open
Senate Majority Leader John Thun, along with leadership John Barrasso of Wyoming and Shelley Capito Moore of West Virginia, joining there, just stating that President Trump, with these lower level officials that are executive appointments that are normally bipartisan and normally go to the Senate floor for a voice vote, are simply being blocked by the Democrats. They have no message. They have nothing to offer the American people other than a communist in New York City. That is the direction of their party. We've spoken on it extensively here at Right Side Broadcasting Network that demos is Greek for of the people. And they maybe once were of the people back in 1828 when New England Republicans were really harnessing power, centralizing banks throughout what was the industrialized northeast of this fair country of ours. And until people like Andrew Jackson, with a mixed history, but being a frontiersman, really challenged that status quo, also the only president to have balanced our budget fully and gotten rid of our debt, which was $58 billion at the time of him serving as the 7th president of the United States. This party has not been of the people, but rather about groupthink. It's about the party of slavery, the Democrats. They continue that today with a lot of their rhetoric. I mean, think about what they've been stating with illegal aliens leaving this country. Many of them have come out there and said, who will work our fields? Almost as if you're going back to the times of slavery. Who will pick our cotton? That is the Democrat line. That is their mantra. That's their message. Because they believe that people and skilled labor should not be given a livable wage. That's the truth of where they're at. They are okay with human trafficking. They're okay with drug trafficking. If they were not, why were they not calling out for the Epstein files over the course of the Autopen administration? Why did they hide the cognitive decline of the former president? Why did they upend the democratic process of 12 million primary voters supporting Joseph R. Biden Jr. for re-election, and then install their communist comrade from California in his place roughly 1 year ago today? Why did they stop Tulsi Gabbard from seeking the nomination in 2020? Why did they go out of their way to stop Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from seeking the Democrat nomination and ultimately pushing him out of the party during the 2024 process? Those are the questions that should be asked in Washington, D.C. But the legacy media won't always do that because they have friends in low places throughout Democrat leadership with No Hips Hakeem and the Palestinian Senator Chucky Schumer, who has quite frankly betrayed the Empire State and will likely lose a primary challenge to that lunatic AOC, that Bronx bartender who really is funded by an apparatus and a network that really ties back to George Soros, among others on the far left. So as we await the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee to hold a hearing on Biden's border betrayal, why aren't those questions asked within the halls and corridors of the power centers of Washington, D.C.? Something to think about on this fair Tuesday, July 22nd. I'm Robert McNeely. We're just minutes away from the 3 o'clock hour on the East Coast. It's high noon on the West Coast, as lots of news breaking, including the rocker legend himself, Ozzy Osbourne, passing away now at the age of 76. Very much an entertainer, and a fun story I actually have regarding his tour manager from way back when. He actually became a Catholic deacon in the Diocese of Rockford, Illinois, outside of Chicago. And I remember going through a music session with this gentleman. Hearing that story as a high schooler was really quite interesting, to hear someone who actually was at his side for those number of years. And he reminded the audience that you can either use your skills for good or for ill or for yourself, and especially when it comes to sharing that gift of music. And that gentleman ultimately did in that role of clergy. But our thoughts and prayers with Ozzy Osbourne's family as he's passing today at the age of 76. And now so much on the table for this president on a daily basis. Today, a new trade deal with the Philippines, a 19% tariff slapped on the Philippine people, a great culture, many of them here in the United States. Very similar to the recent deal President Trump made with the great country of Indonesia. So they need access to our markets. President Trump wants more of that income coming into the United States. In turn, we will not pay a reciprocal tariff. That's a zero threshold for us here at home, but great for all countries involved to have access to one another's goods. President Trump putting out many different letters over the course of 2 weeks recommending those tariffs and putting those thresholds around 25% to even 40% for other countries around the world, as historic peace deals are being done thanks to the leadership of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, traveling miles and miles to get all of those peace deals done. The most notable, perhaps, the Democratic Congo of Rwanda, and also between other African nations coming together to end these terrible conflicts, some that have lasted roughly 30 years. And we saw those African leaders, the round table, many nominating President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize in that process. So much happening now. We're going to go to the U.S. Senate hearing on this Biden border betrayal for your viewing pleasure at 3 o'clock Eastern.
I want to address is a claim that illegal aliens are not criminals, but law-abiding individuals. Neither the Democrats nor the media are willing to tell the public the truth. That the moment an alien illegally enters the United States, they have committed a crime under the U.S. law to enter the U.S. legally. America is a country of laws, and we expect anyone who wishes to come to our country to obey those laws. Another false narrative peddled by the far left is that illegal aliens are not receiving due process when they are arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This naturally begs the question, what sort of process are these individuals actually due? The idea that somebody could break our laws, enter our country illegally, and then be entitled to all the rights and privileges of an American citizen is a little far-fetched, to be sure. While the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution applies to all individuals within the United States, illegal aliens are not entitled to the same level of due process as American citizens. The fact of the matter is that by the time any alien has received an order of removal, they have had all the due process they are owed under the law. Most aliens with final orders of removal have been in the immigration system for almost a decade. Many have had the opportunity to have their day in court, the very essence of due process, but they neglected to show up. Another false narrative is that ICE is not targeting the worst of the worst criminals. But the fact of the matter is that as we speak, there are 291,141 criminal aliens in the United States today who have final orders of removal. Just this morning in the Senate Judiciary Committee, a comment was made that ICE is targeting gardeners. Well, 291,141 criminal aliens who are under final orders of removal are still in the United States. For this fiscal year alone, 213,279 criminal aliens with final orders of removal already have convictions, while 78,546 have pending criminal charges. Even more disturbing is the fact that 282,194 of these criminal aliens are still roaming free and not in ICE custody yet. There are many criminal aliens in the United States continuing to commit heinous crimes, even to this day. Some of these criminals are part of transnational criminal networks and organized gangs. All you need to do is look at the posters in this room to see some of the worst criminals ICE has apprehended recently: murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and sex traffickers. One of our witnesses here today, Sheriff Roy Boyd, can attest to the types of crimes he sees, even in Goliad, the Texas county with a population of less than 8,000. The Friday before the July the 4th weekend, Sheriff Boyd's officers arrested a 29-year-old Iranian national who entered the United States illegally, not once, but twice. The first time this criminal committed a violent aggravated felony in Indiana, and while he was charged for the crime, he received a suspended sentence in exchange for his removal from the United States. But his crime spree did not end there. Despite being deported, he returned to the United States again, illegally. And what did he do when he came back? He murdered a man in Galveston, Texas, a murder that was caught on video. Thankfully, he was arrested less than 12 hours later with the murder weapon still in his possession. This crime should never have happened. I want to remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that there was a time in the not-so-distant past when they agreed that criminal aliens should be deported. But it seems like amnesia has set in, especially because we now happen to have a president in office who's restored the rule of law and now requires enforcement of existing laws. Recall the deporter-in-chief? That would be President Obama. And who was in charge of immigration enforcement during President Obama's term in office? None other than Tom Homan, President Trump's current border czar. In fact, Tom Homan received a Presidential Rank Award during the Obama administration for his service as the head of ICE's enforcement and removal operations. The laws haven't changed since President Obama was in office. Only the party of the president in office has changed. And today we have a pro-enforcement president who was elected in a decisive victory, winning the Electoral College, the popular vote, and every single swing state. He was elected in large part, I'd submit, because of his pro-immigration enforcement provisions, something 54% of Americans support, including Hispanic Americans in my state, many of whose families have come here lawfully and followed all the rules. American voters know full well that deterrence is an important part of immigration enforcement and preventing the flow of criminal aliens into the United States, which means swift apprehension, detention, and deportation. And that works. The Congress just recently passed what's been called the One Big Beautiful Bill that includes billions of additional dollars for ICE detention facilities and for more personnel to make sure that our laws on the books that Congress passed and were signed into law are actually enforced. The state of Florida has stepped up to the plate recently, helping the administration to open a detention facility that's come to be known as Alligator Alcatraz. I'm hopeful that other states will step up to help in similar ways. If we could find a way to make something like this work in Texas, I would strongly support it. And I'd encourage our governor, as well as Secretary Noem, to explore the possibility of locating future detention facilities in Texas. The far-left activists and the mainstream media who support their efforts continue to fan the flame with their rhetoric and misinformation. This is done with one goal in mind: to do anything and everything to undermine President Trump's domestic agenda, just as they did during his first term. And finally, I'd like to end my remarks with a reminder. We're here today to remind the public of the real tragedy of President Biden's open border policies, the hundreds of victims of criminal illegal aliens, crimes that could have been avoided if the laws on the books had simply been enforced. That's why we have two wonderful angel moms here today. First, Maria Vega, the mother of slain border agent Javier Vega Jr., who was killed August the 3rd, 2014. Javier's angelversary, as Ms. Vega calls the date of his death, is less than 2 weeks away. Javier died nearly 11 years ago, but the fact remains he was murdered by illegal aliens who never should have been in the United States in the first place. I was proud to honor Javier and work with the National Border Patrol Council in the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector to have a Border Patrol checkpoint named in his honor. I also want to welcome Tammy Nobles, the mother of Kayla Hamilton. This is a particularly difficult week for her because Kayla's birthday is July the 24th, this Thursday, and the anniversary of her death is July 27th, this upcoming Sunday. And I'm grateful that she's willing to join us here today and tell her story. Ms. Nobles said the most joyful day for her was when her daughter was born, and the saddest day for her is her daughter's heaven date, July the 27th. Kayla was viciously murdered by an MS-13 gang member who originally entered the United States as an unaccompanied minor and was released into the custody of an unvetted sponsor. We're honored to have both Maria and Tammy with us today to share their stories and tell about the loss of their loved ones and how it continues to impact their lives today. I also want to welcome Victor Avila. Victor knows all too well the price that our law enforcement officers pay just to do their jobs. Victor and his partner were shot by gang members. Victor was seriously wounded and his partner lost his life on that day. I intend to introduce a bill in the Senate to honor Ms. Noble's daughter, Kayla Hamilton. The bill will require that HHS conduct mandatory checks on all unaccompanied minors and bar criminal alien sponsors from being allowed to assume custody of such children. A similar bill was introduced by Representative Russell Fry in the House. You may ask, why is it necessary to pass a law to get Health and Human Services to do mandatory checks on unaccompanied minors and to bar criminal alien sponsors? Well, that's because laws barring that do not currently exist, and we need to make sure that this can never happen again. And now I yield to Ranking Member Padilla to give his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. You know, prior to the start of this Congress, for nearly 4 years, I served as chair of this subcommittee within Ranking Member Cornyn. Now our roles have been reversed, so I'm happy to be here as a ranking member under Chairman Cornyn's leadership here. For 4 years, though, when I was chair, we held hearings examining everything from immigrants serving in the military and then our healthcare system to America's refugees admissions program and the need to better resource our overwhelmed immigration courts. So today, 6 months after President Biden has left office, we hear Republicans continue to talk about how Donald Trump has solved our border crisis. But you won't be surprised to learn that they're also focusing on, guess what? The Biden border betrayal. That's what they call it. And I suspect that years down the road, they'll continue to point the finger at President Biden. But here's what Republicans won't be saying. That if Donald Trump and Republicans were truly focused on just targeting violent criminals, Democrats would have no objections. I know I've been saying it. If that's really what was going on, there would be no discussion, there would be no debate, there would be no disagreement. You also won't hear Republicans share the data, the fact that a large number of undocumented immigrants in the United States actually entered the United States lawfully and are only currently undocumented because they overstayed their visa, or maybe they entered the country following the rules of the temporary protected status programs outlined by prior administrations, but protections that have been removed, turning a legal immigrant into an undocumented immigrant. You won't hear them share those facts. 6 months into Donald Trump's second term as president, it is increasingly clear who the administration is going after. Just look at how they're doing it. They're raiding workplaces and staking out court hearings. They're going after farmers and farm workers, students and families and business owners, many of whom, other than being undocumented, do not have any violent criminal record, and men who have been living here, contributing to the success of their communities and the country for years and years, if not decades. So none of what we're seeing happening around the country, or very little, is actually targeting criminals. And I'm not asking you to take my word for it. It shouldn't be hard, but it is hard for some to take my word for it. Let's look at the administration's own data. Less than 10% of immigrants who ICE has taken into custody have serious criminal convictions. Less than 10%. Again, don't just take my word for it. This is administration's data. In fact, compared to the first Trump administration, these Donald Trump and Stephen Miller quotas have led to a 500% increase in the number of arrests of non-citizens without criminal records. And as a federal judge ruled less than 2 weeks ago, there is, quote, a mountain of evidence, end quote, showing federal agents are illegally profiling and arresting people based on their race, accents, or work. So no, let's not pretend that this is only about cracking down on violent criminals. This is increasingly about sending armored vehicles and agents and tactical gear into communities to intimidate and sow fear, not to protect. Should also at some point ask the questions about where the resources are being redirected from to escalate the immigration enforcement activities. Because the fact of the matter is, whether they're being diverted elsewhere within the Department of Homeland Security, from the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, they're being taken away from other critical missions that are critical to our nation's security. Not just white-collar crime, we can have a whole session just about that. How about fentanyl task forces that are now being under-resourced because of these ill-conceived strategies? Now, all this is not just morally wrong. It's also bad for our economy. The people being targeted are often the people who are harvesting our fruit and vegetables, who work in meatpacking plants or in the service industry. The very same group of people who just a few years ago, at the outset of the COVID pandemic, Donald Trump declared essential. And the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump has simply gone too far, and the public is starting to turn against him. A Gallup poll published on July 11th, just a couple of weeks ago, showed a dramatic swing in public opinion, in public awareness and understanding is how it should read. In just the last year, the percent of Americans who think immigration is, quote, a good thing for the country has jumped 15 points to a record high 79%. At the same time, Americans who want to see immigration decreased dropped from 55 to 30%. Americans across the country are rejecting the cruel and indiscriminate treatment of the neighbors they've known for decades. Yet earlier this month, Republicans in Congress rubber-stamped more than $150 billion to fund this administration's disastrous enforcement agenda. $150 billion, not to help hire additional asylum officers that we so desperately need to process the cases and meet the demand on our system, not $150 billion to ensure that unaccompanied children, for example, some as young as 2 or 3 years old, have legal counsel as they face a judge on their own, with their own future on the line, and not $150 billion to hire additional immigration judges, even as more and more people are detained and the administration is firing immigration judges at alarming rates. Instead, this is additional taxpayer dollars to ramp up the mass deportation raids that have been so poorly executed. They are sweeping up United States citizens, including veterans. And so I do ask, why are we here? What more do you want? It's clear why we're here today. We're here because Donald Trump is scapegoating immigrants. It's always been his outlet. It's long been his way to distract from a massively unpopular agenda, like making the largest cuts to Medicaid in history in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich, and to make ICE's budget larger than the budget of the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. This is their break glass in case of emergency option when public sentiment turns against them and their agenda. Hasn't been only about targeting violent criminals, and it's certainly not about fixing or modernizing our immigration system. So Democrats are glad to be here today to help set the record straight. My message to the Trump administration is this: the numbers don't back you up. The heartbreaking stories we hear on a daily basis do not back you up, and the American public doesn't back you up. So I urge this subcommittee and the committee as a whole to please, let's get back to the real work of reforming our immigration system. And with that, Mr. Chair, if I can introduce the minority witnesses.
Let me please ask all of the witnesses to stand, and I'll administer the oath. And we'll do the introductions. If you raise your right hand or repeat after me, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. Please be seated. I'll introduce the majority witnesses, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Padilla. Tammy Nobles, as you've heard, is the mother of Kayla Hamilton, who was murdered by Walter Javier Martinez, an illegal alien gang member who entered the United States as an unaccompanied alien child from El Salvador. When Kayla was being murdered, she managed to call and left a voicemail on her boyfriend's phone. In the voicemail, you can hear the struggle going on in the background, and Kayla could be heard crying. Martinez can be heard in the voicemail hushing her and near the end telling her, "I'm sorry," in Spanish, while strangling her with a phone cord. After Kayla was dead, Martinez tied her up and sexually assaulted her. Kayla fought for her life that day. She had bruises up and down her arms, her fingers and left side of her face, her back, and down her leg, and deep wounds to her neck from the cord. Victor Avila as a retired ICE Homeland Security Investigation Supervisory Special Agent. As an HSI Special Agent, Victor served on the border and as an accredited diplomat to Mexico, Spain, and Portugal. He advised those governments on complex and wide-ranging criminal investigations, including narcotics trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, financial violations, commercial fraud, and counterterrorism. While he was on official assignment to Mexico, Victor suffered multiple gunshot wounds and survived a violent ambush by the Mexican Los Zetas cartel, where Special Agent Jaime Zapata tragically lost his life in the line of duty. Maria Vega is the mother of former U.S. Marine and Border Patrol Agent Javier Vega, Jr. On Sunday, August the 3rd, 2014, Javier Vega was out with his family when two criminal illegal aliens ambushed him and tried to steal Javier's truck. The two aliens jumped out of the stolen vehicle they were driving and without hesitation or warning began shooting at Javier and his family. The illegal aliens shot Javier in the back and his father in the chest in front of his minor children. Andrew R. Arthur is a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. Arthur previously served as staff director for the United States House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the National Security Subcommittee from January 2015 to September 2016, and was counsel for the United States House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary in Washington, D.C. from July 2001 to November 2006. Sheriff Roy Boyd is the sheriff of Goliad County, Texas. Goliad is a rural South Texas county with a population of around 1,000, situated about halfway between Houston and Laredo along U.S. Highway 59. Sheriff Boyd has been a police officer for 31 years and retired from the Victoria Police Department and the Victoria County Sheriff's Office prior to becoming sheriff of Goliad County. Sheriff Boyd has also worked as one of the leads on Texas's Operation Lone Star. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before introducing the minority witnesses, I do want to take a moment to express my sympathies with Mrs. Vega and Mr. Nobles for your loss. And on behalf of all my Democratic colleagues, I also reiterate that we denounce violence, particularly violence against law enforcement. So I just want to make sure we are clear where we stand on this side of the aisle. First, I'd like to introduce Alejandro Barranco. Alejandro is a Marine veteran from Orange, California, an older brother to two active duty Marines and son to Narciso Barranco. Alejandro's father, Narciso, is an immigrant from Mexico who has lived in the United States for more than 30 years and has never committed a crime in the United States. Today, Alejandro will testify about the violent and outrageous treatment his father experienced at the hands of Border Patrol agents and the betrayal that he feels as a veteran who proudly served his country. Thank you for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Deborah Fleischhaker. Ms. Fleischhaker has served in several career and political roles at the Department of Homeland Security, as well as ICE, including as ICE's acting chief of staff. Ms. Fleischhaker has also served as ICE's Assistant Director for Regulatory Affairs and Policy and as DHS's Executive Secretary and acting DHS Chief Privacy and Chief FOIA Officer. Ms. Fleischhaker will lean on her extensive experience and understanding of both DHS and ICE operations in her testimony today. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to introduce retired police commander Dr. Giovanni Velis. Dr. Velis served with the Minneapolis Police Department for over 30 years before retiring in 2023. As an officer, he worked with the Drug Enforcement Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation task forces, as well as the Minneapolis Police Department's Organized Crime Unit. After immigrating from Ecuador and growing up in New York City, Dr. Feliz was the first immigrant to serve as a police lieutenant and commander in the Minneapolis Police Department. He will testify about the importance of building bridges between law enforcement and immigrant communities from his professional and academic perspectives. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I know we're anticipating the attendance of Chairman Grassley here momentarily, but in the meantime, we'll hear opening statements from the witnesses. And Mr. Avila, can we start with you? And if you'll please keep your statement to 5 minutes, and then we'll get through everybody, and then we can come back and ask some questions, have more of a discussion.
Good afternoon, Chairman. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Good afternoon, Senator Padilla. Good afternoon to the panel members. My name is Victor Avila. I'm a retired ICE Homeland Security Investigations Supervisory Special Agent. HSI is responsible for investigating crimes involving immigration, trade, customs, and border security that threaten the security of the American homeland. While serving with HSI, I personally led criminal investigations of human traffickers, drug smugglers, and violent criminals, many of whom were criminal illegal aliens. During my tenure as a federal officer, I served under 3 different administrations, and as an HSI special agent, I served on the border, born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and also, like you mentioned, as an accredited diplomat in Mexico, Spain, and Portugal. I advise these governments on complex and wide-ranging criminal investigations, including narcotics trafficking, armed trafficking, human trafficking, financial violations, commercial fraud, and counterterrorism. You mentioned this, Senator, while on official assignment in Mexico. I suffered 3 gunshot wounds and survived by the grace of God after a violent ambush by Los Zetas cartel, where my partner, Special Agent Jaime Zapata, tragically lost his life in the line of duty. I have witnessed what a human being is capable to do to another, especially a child. As a subject matter expert in human trafficking investigations and victims identification, I tragically have seen things that I will not ever be able to take away from my head. I describe it as pure evil. Drug trafficking, human smuggling are just a few crimes that illegal aliens are involved with. I have experienced the violence and the imminent threat that we face from not just the illegal aliens, many of who are associated with Mexican cartels. What is happening today with our ICE officers and agents is unprecedented. The doxing of our men and women of ICE and accusing them of kidnapping when it's a lawful arrest or disappearing people simply must stop. They are upholding their oath and performing the scope of their duties. Vilifying officers because some people disagree with the enforcement of the law or because it contradicts their ideology is just not acceptable. Thousands of police officers arrest people every single day, and that officer is not singled out for doing their job. Why, then, are ICE officers being targeted? This, I believe, is a politically driven issue. How do we get here? The Biden administration opened the border utilizing illegal policy like the CBP One app and exploiting our asylum criteria and parole systems. The Biden administration was very successful in limiting the budget for ICE. They were successful at bringing the morale down in law enforcement, especially Border Patrol. They were successful in having them lose their identity, stripped of their authority, tie their hands behind their backs to not do their jobs. The interior enforcement that you're seeing right now was almost non-existent, especially worksite enforcement. They were silenced by the media. The priority of ICE is the removal of criminal illegal aliens, those with existing criminal histories in the U.S. or their home country. However, there are illegals in the U.S. that were not properly vetted by the Biden administration, and although no criminal history is registered in our databases, many are affiliated with a gang or cartel activity. Those caught as a collateral will also be processed for removal as well. Illegal aliens detected and arrested by ICE are receiving due process. It's important to note that not all illegal aliens face the same removal proceedings. It depends how the illegal entered the U.S., where they entered, the country of origin, many different factors. Some illegals are subject to mandatory detention while others can be removed immediately like visa overstays. The illegals with final removal orders and their due process through an immigration court subject them to arrest and removal immediately. And just to be clear, ICE officers and HSI special agents do not require a warrant to conduct an arrest. 90+% of the arrests that I conducted in my career were warrantless. It is important for Congress to engage with other countries for the removal process and establish memorandums of understandings, especially in Mexico and Central America. I think Congress has a vital role to better support the mission of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, ICE, and the roles that they play every single day safeguarding our border. We have many, many things to talk about that the big, beautiful bill you'll see a big difference coming very, very soon to augment their capacity. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Arthur.
Thank you. Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Padilla, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me today to discuss this salient topic. There's been a great deal of contention of late over ICE arrests of aliens in the interior. With 33 years of immigration experience as a prosecutor, congressional staffer, and immigration judge, I hope to put those arrests into context. Some 300,000 aliens have been arrested in the interior under the second Trump administration, according to DHS. That's more than the 113,500 aliens ICRO arrested in FY 2024 and the 170,600 ICE arrests in FY 2023. And the agency is on track to make twice as many interior arrests this year as in FY 2009, 298,000. That said, as the Supreme Court noted in INS versus Lopez Mendoza, a case addressing the legality of worksite raids, the average immigration officer made 500 alien arrests per year in 1984, at a time when the unauthorized population was significantly smaller. If ICE were operating at that same pace today, the agency would have made roughly 3 million interior arrests since January. According to DHS, 70% of the aliens ICE arrested in the last 6 months have criminal histories, either arrests or convictions. That's roughly equivalent to FY 2024, when 72% of ICE interior arrests involved aliens with criminal histories, but much higher than the 43% criminal history arrest rate in FY 2023. Most of the ICE enforcement attention, both in Congress and in the media, has focused on what ICE refers to as, quote, at-large arrests at homes and in public places. When I was an INS trial attorney in California in the mid-1990s, there were few at-large arrests because most jurisdictions allowed immigration officers into their jails and other secure facilities to take custody of criminal aliens. As the New York City Criminal Justice Coordinator told the House Judiciary Committee, at a hearing I staffed in February 2003, the NYPD cooperated, quote, with federal authorities in investigating and apprehending aliens suspected of criminal activity. Close quote. As I note in my written testimony, that cooperation degraded in the mid-2010s as jurisdictions began implementing, quote, sanctuary policies, close quote, to impede ICE enforcement. Sanctuary policies only protect criminals, and if they were to end, ICE would likely be too busy processing criminals in local jails to perform many at-large arrests. Because alienage isn't a critical factor in most state and local arrests and prosecutions, there's no way to know what percentage of the undocumented have criminal records. But what is known is that 100% of criminal aliens do have criminal records, and the recidivism rate is high. A 2011 GAO study found that criminal aliens had, on average, 7 separate arrests apiece. As most of those criminal aliens live in and prey on immigrant communities, other immigrants are the ones harmed the most. Sanctuary policies also force ICE agents into the community to arrest criminal targets where the threat of violent resistance is higher and where they often encounter other aliens here unlawfully, likely the key reason why the percentage of ICE arrests involving aliens with criminal histories isn't higher. Note also that all aliens, including criminals, are entitled to constitutional protections throughout the removal process, including due process law. The process due those aliens, as Mr. Avila just noted, differs from what the Constitution accords to criminal defendants and is often less than that accorded to U.S. citizens. The Due Process Clause applies to all persons in the United States, but the Supreme Court has held, quote, the nature of that protection may vary dependent upon an alien's status and circumstance. Finally, I'll note that I was a congressional staffer on 9/11. Congress responded to those attacks by tightening the vetting process for aliens coming lawfully to protect Americans from criminals and other security threats. The hard-earned lessons of September 11th were ignored over the last 4 years, as the last administration released millions of unvetted aliens into our communities, too many of whom have gone on to harm innocent victims here. We have the most generous legal immigration system in the world, but American voters will only continue to support those policies if they are safe from criminal threats and know the laws will be enforced. That's likely why 75% of respondents in the most recent Harvard-Harris poll supported the current administration's, quote, efforts to deport criminals who are here illegally, close quote. In closing, thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. Sheriff Boyd.
Chairman Cornyn and members of the Senate Committee, thank you for having me here today. As you've stated, I'm the sheriff of Goliad County, Texas. We're a small rural county sheriff's office, about halfway between Houston and Laredo on Highway 59. So we're on a major corridor for legitimate and illegitimate products going to and from the border. I'll get straight to the point. The border Biden policy has had the most significant negative impact on the safety and security of our communities in South Texas in my 31 years of law enforcement. As an example, in Goliad County at the Sheriff's Office prior to 2021, the Goliad County Sheriff's Office averaged 77 arrests per year. From January 2021 to date, we've averaged 413 arrests per year. That's a significant increase. I looked in our records and found no records of smuggling of humans cases or engaging in organized criminal activity cases prior to January of 2021 for our law enforcement agency. From 2021 to 2025, the Goliad County Sheriff's Office arrested 96 people for smuggling of humans and 126 for engaging in organized criminal activity. These kind of activities have skyrocketed throughout Texas as a result of Biden's open border policy. On top of that, we've turned over 145 illegal aliens to Border Patrol for processing and possible deportation. But this policy has brought quite a few other things, including significant property damage. In South Texas, there have been thousands of events where smugglers have driven through fences and have caused much damage to private property, tearing down fences. There are multiple ranches in South Texas that have over $100,000 in fence damage per year as a result of this open border policy and the cartel incursions into South Texas. Many rural houses have been abandoned out of fear of the cartel smugglers going through. There's been a drastic increase in the auto theft of pickup trucks throughout South Texas, because what many people don't realize is that the smugglers are using stolen trucks. That takes tens of thousands of vehicles to get millions of people through South Texas every year. And those vehicles are stolen from Texans and used in this illicit trade. Trespassing on private property has become a commonplace to the point where many of the ranches have been abandoned, where people fear being on them. In Goliad County alone, even though we're 180 miles from the border, in 2021, we discovered 16 cartel stash sites in our county. Those are just the ones we found by going out and looking. We had what was described as the Department of Homeland Security as the largest inland cartel stash site ever discovered in the United States of America. But the property damage is just part of it. It's the physical and the psychological damage, and I will give you just a few examples starting in 2021. We have a lot of residents in rural South Texas with credible fear of the cartel smugglers coming through their property. In April of 2021, a traffic stop in Goliad County led to the arrest of Brisa Santana. What we found was Miss Santana had been recruited in a bar in Dallas by a gentleman from Mexico, and she had gone down to the border and picked up 3 girls who were all in their late teens, early 20s. And they were being told that they were being brought into the United States to be reunited with their family members who were already illegally here in the U.S. But our investigation revealed that Miss Santana had fake Social Security cards in her underwear when we got her to jail, led to further questioning. And what that investigation revealed was those 3 young ladies were considered especials. They were never going to be reunited with their families here. They were being taken to Chinatown in Houston to be put in sex slavery, indentured servitude. As you already pointed out, earlier this month, we caught the murderer in our county. We've dealt with a lot of different violence as a result of the Biden's open border policy. But I will leave you with this. For anyone who does not believe that these things are happening, I'm going to leave you with a quote from a letter I found in a sex slave house from a raid I did in Rockport, Texas. The letter that I found there starts off with, "Dear daughter, in the USA, we sometimes have something called a slave boy or a slave girl. We call it an indentured servant." This letter goes on to articulate that it takes 5 to 13 years for these slaves to buy their freedom once they're brought into the United States of America. That is, unless they're sold to a new master before their debt is paid off. Thank you for your time, your consideration, and I will yield for any questions you have.
Ms. Nobles.
Thank you for having me here today and allowing me to speak. On July 27, 2022, I received the worst news that a parent can ever get, that my newly 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was found deceased with injuries consistent with a homicide. There are no words to describe the heart-wrenching, soul-crushing pain of losing your child so horrifically. Kayla was a happy and loving person. She loved life and God. She loved going to church and learning about Jesus and the Bible stories. She showed the world that being yourself was okay, and you didn't have to follow everyone else. She was extremely ambitious, and despite having autism, she was determined to make her way in this world. She loved animals, especially her cat Oreo, and cared about the homeless. At first, we knew very few details of the murder until an arrest. At the end of March of 2022, Walter Javier Martinez was apprehended by Border Patrol crossing illegally into the U.S. at the southwest border in Rio Grande City, Texas. Martinez stated that he was 16 years old and he feared gang activity in his country in El Salvador. As a UAC, Martinez was granted access into the United States with no background checks or vetting. Health and Human Services and Homeland Security did not verify the sponsor and allowed Martinez to go live in Frederick, Maryland. There were behavior issues with him living with the sponsor, and he ended up staying with his half-brother who lived in the same neighborhood mobile home park as Kayla. There were behavioral issues with Walter, so the half-brother called the property manager of the mobile home park, which I thought was a legit company. We learned that an illegal immigrant who was a priest owned some of the mobile homes and allowed his cousin to rent a home to a 16-year-old gang member in the same mobile home as Kayla. Through the investigation of Kayla's murder, we found out that this priest and his cousin knew Walter Javier Martinez from El Salvador and knew he was running from a homicide. And they decided to put him in the same mobile home as Kayla. Kayla and her boyfriend and young family did not know Walter Javier Martinez, and they did not know their rental rights and didn't know they had a right to say no. They were all afraid to say no in fear of getting kicked out onto the streets, so they said nothing. Martinez was only living there for 5 days before he violently and brutally murdered my daughter. Walter Javier Martinez broke into Kayla's room while she was sleeping that morning. Kayla left a voicemail on her boyfriend's phone. According to the voicemail, a struggle was going on, and Kayla was heard crying, groaning, and struggling to breathe. Martinez was also heard on the voicemail, hushing her, and near the end telling her, "I'm sorry," in Spanish, while continuing strangling her with her phone cord. After she was deceased, Martinez tied her up and sexually assaulted her. This was confirmed by the annual swabs that matched Martinez's DNA. Kayla fought for her life that day. She had bruises up and down her arms, her fingers, the left side of her face, her back, and down her leg, and deep wounds to her neck from the cord. Local police knew right from the beginning that he was the main suspect just by their initial investigation. It took the Aberdeen Police Department to confirm that Martinez was a known MS-13 gang member and that he had a criminal record in El Salvador in 2020. If Health and Human Services or Homeland Security would have done a background check, then they would have known this, and Martinez would have not been able to be on U.S. soil. With Martinez being 16 years old, Maryland Child Protective Services took custody of Martinez until the DNA results came back. The Aberdeen Police Department was very transparent to CPS. Affiliation in their home country. Sponsors also need to be screened and verified. Under the Kayla-Hamilton Act introduced last week by Representative Fry, Health and Human Services will be required to gather background information on all potential sponsors and every adult in their household. If Homeland Security and Health and Human Services had checked Martinez's background, then they would have known that he was an MS-13 gang member, and my precious daughter Kayla would still be alive today. All both agencies had to do was make one phone call to El Salvador, and they would have known that he was an MS-13 gang member and that he had a criminal record for illicit gang activity. To prevent such tragedies from happening again, the Kayla-Hamilton Act will mandate background checks on UACs and the sponsors so that no person will be at risk. Sorry, I went over a little bit.
Thank you, Ms. Nobles. Mrs. Vega.
Thank you, Senator, for having me here and allowing me to tell our story. My name is Maria Herrera Vega. I am an angel mom and the mother of two incredible sons. Javier Harvey Vega Jr., my firstborn, one of my two pride and joys, an amazing grandson, son, brother, husband, father, you name it. He was it. He was just amazing with a heart of gold like no one you have ever met. An American with a love for his country, law enforcement, life, and family. Harvey joined the United States Marine Corps 5 months after graduating from high school. He served 4 years. After leaving the Marine Corps, attended college while working a full-time job. Immediately after graduation, he was hired by Christus Spohn Hospital as a biomed technical engineer. In 2006, he joined the United States Border Patrol until 2014. Javier Harvey Vega Jr. Remember that name. Jordi Vega, my second baby, another amazing son, joined the United States Marine Corps as well, same as his big brother. He was deployed to Iraq 3 times. We nearly lost Jordi when the convoy he was traveling in hit an IED. On his 4th deployment, this time to Afghanistan, he and his men were ambushed and Jordi was shot in the arm. He served 9 years in the military. Jordi now lives in Louisiana and works for an American company. Sunday, August the 3rd, 2014 was a day that started off with wonderful memories of our U.S. Marine and Border Patrol agent son and his family visiting us. The entire day was planned, good quality family time, a barbecue, shopping, rifle sighting in preparation for hunting season, and some fishing to end the day before they headed back home. Instead, late that afternoon, our beautiful day turned into a nightmare when 2 criminal illegal aliens decided to ambush us in an attempt to steal both 4-wheel drive trucks. The 2 illegals jumped out of the stolen vehicle they were driving, and without hesitation or a warning, they began shooting at us, without even asking us to hand over the keys. In the process, Harvey was shot in the chest. My husband, Javier, was shot in the back, and they continued shooting at the rest of us, which included me, my daughter-in-law, 2 grandsons, and their friend. When I heard the yelling coming from the illegals while they shot at us, I fell back off the chair that I was sitting on, and I struggled to get up, but instead had to crawl to my son, who had tried to pick up an AR which he had left leaning by the truck to defend us. Do you know what it is like to see your son go down after being shot? Do you know what it is like to hear the gunshots, bullets whizzing past you? Do you know what it's like when your mind is trying to process everything, telling your grandchildren to duck while thinking your son is on the ground with a bullet in his chest? Do you know what it's like to hear your son's last words to his father? Keep shooting, Dad. Keep shooting were his last words. That should never have happened. The illegals not only possessed a stolen vehicle, they also possessed guns that were stolen. They each had a long list of crimes, including holding a gun to a toddler's head if the family did not hand over the keys, their money, their phones, their vehicles. Who does this to a toddler? They had served time in county jail, been previously deported, fined $10 in order to self-deport again. These same illegals had robbed our friend Douglas Light on his very own ranch in La Feria, holding a gun to his grandson Paul's ribcage and threatening to shoot him if Doug did not hand over the keys to the truck. Doug did as he was told, and the illegals drove off with the truck, trailer, and the lawn equipment. Going back to the nightmare that we lived, had my husband and I not returned fire, the illegals would have killed everyone there, leaving no witnesses, and that's including my grandbabies. 5 days from today, it'll be Harvey's 11th angelversary. 11 years is how long I have lived with survivor's guilt. 11 years is how much I have struggled to survive without my baby. 11 years I have lived with flashbacks during every waking moment. 11 years we have celebrated the boys' birthdays, graduations, weddings, starting new families, new careers, and amazing accomplishments without my baby. 11 years I have witnessed how his killing has impacted the community, our families, his work families, his childhood friends. I have seen the heartbreak in everyone's voice, hearts, and actions. Illegal aliens have impacted American lives in a very negative way. They have no regard for human life, as I witnessed firsthand. The illegals that killed Harvey also shot my husband in the back and shot at innocent children and women. My grandbabies and their friend were only 8 and 11 years old. Take a moment and imagine your child or grandchild witnessing this horror. How does that make you feel? Would you be okay with this? Had our immigration laws been enforced, our son would be here. Barack Obama failed me, my family, and our community, and our nation. My husband now suffers from PTSD. He is handicapped because of the extent of damage the bullet caused. Nerves and ligaments were severed when the .45 caliber bullet traveled from one side of his waist, narrowly missing his spine before exiting on the other side of his body. I want you to know that we do not have an issue with people coming to America legally. We do have immigration laws in place for a reason, and they need to be enforced. And as politicians, you need to allow those in charge to enforce these laws. We are not a lawless nation. I myself was not born in America. I am the daughter of an American-born father and a Mexican-born mother. However, my father did not smuggle or sneak us into this country. After marrying my mother, he stayed by her side in Mexico until he applied to move us back to his country. He waited patiently, filled out all the necessary documents, and paid all the fees. He never even asked for government assistance, making do with his pay as a farmer and carefully planning for times when the weather did not permit work. He taught me and my siblings to be God-fearing, hardworking, law-abiding citizens. My 2 older siblings and I are proud naturalized citizens, and my little brother is a U.S. citizen. La Feria, Texas, my little town's population is about 7,000. Our little community has lost 3 young lives to illegal alien crime. Noemi Dominguez, a 26-year-old teacher murdered by criminal illegal alien Angel Maturino Resendiz in 1999. Some of you might remember him as a railroad killer. He was a serial killer that murdered so many people throughout America. Javier Harvey Vega Jr., 36-year-old, father of 3 boys, a U.S. Marine and Border Patrol agent, murdered in cold blood in front of his family by Gustavo Tijerina Sandoval and Ismael Hernandez Vallejo in 2014. They both had a long list of crimes they committed throughout the Rio Grande Valley. If committing these crimes was their job, it doesn't seem to me like they were producing anything in the community. They were not contributing to the community. Maria Macias, a 37-year-old mother of 3 beautiful young daughters, killed in a car accident caused by illegal alien Bedelin Alegria in 2022, who instead of trying to render aid, fled from the scene of the accident. That's 3 young lives from my town. This is what family separation really looks like. Not one angel family will ever see our loved ones again. Their lives were taken by illegal aliens. Now that you know a mother that had to shoot back to defend and protect her family, do you still believe we should have open borders? Open borders have consequences, and you can see from what I have experienced, because of the crimes committed by illegals, the pain lives with us for the rest of our lives. You took an oath to uphold the Constitution and work for we the people. That means working with your fellow politicians, regardless of which side of the aisle you are on. You are supposed to work together representing us, ensuring that those coming in are obeying our immigration laws. They need to be properly vetted for not only for their safety, but yours and ours. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Ms. Vega. Ms. Fleischaker?
Chairman Cornyn, Ranking Member Padilla, thank you for the opportunity to
Please punch the...
It's on. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I currently serve as the principal consultant at Blackbird Ventures, and prior to that, I spent nearly 14 years at the Department of Homeland Security as both a career public servant and a political appointee, including as the acting ICE Chief of Staff and the ICE Assistant Director for Regulatory Affairs and Policy. The views I'm sharing today are my own and don't reflect the official positions of DHS or ICE. At the core of today's hearing is a critical question. How can we enforce immigration laws in a way that protects national security, ensures public safety, and respects legal rights? The answer must be grounded in facts, professional judgment, and strategic use of limited resources, not fear, spectacle, or indiscriminate enforcement. Unfortunately, the Trump administration's approach has strayed from these principles. Rather than focus on individuals who pose a real risk, like those with serious criminal convictions or recent unlawful entries, the administration has embraced a quota-driven model that prioritizes volume over safety. Officers have reportedly been pressured to meet 3,000 arrests per day, regardless of risk level. And as of June 2025, nearly half of all ICE arrests involved people with no criminal history at all. This isn't just unjust, it's ineffective. It diverts resources from genuine threats, floods the immigration courts and detention system, and lowers morale among career officers. It also erodes public safety. When we target low-risk individuals simply to boost numbers, we lose focus on serious threats like organized crime, child exploitation, and human trafficking. We've also seen a rollback of critical safeguards. ICE arrests at sensitive locations like schools, hospitals, and courthouses have surged. This deters crime victims from seeking help and punishes people for following the law and appearing in court. That makes everyone less safe. Enforcement tactics have become more aggressive and less accountable. Officers increasingly conduct operations wearing masks and without clearly identifying themselves. And the Trump administration has eliminated the ICE body-worn camera program and weakened key oversight offices. In a democracy, the public has a right to know who's exercising government power and under what authority. In short, what we need is not broader enforcement, we need smarter enforcement. Enforcement that is targeted, lawful, transparent, and focused on protecting communities, not padding arrest statistics. And we can't ignore the toll this approach takes on law enforcement officers themselves. When professionals are asked to meet daily quotas, arrest quotas, it undermines their sense of mission and integrity. Being told to prioritize administrative arrests of low-risk individuals over pursuing serious threats corrodes morale and creates a culture of frustration and burnout. This isn't sustainable, and it's not what public safety demands. We also must remember that how we enforce our immigration laws sends a powerful message. Are we using our laws to instill fear and divide? Or are we using them to reflect our values of safety, fairness, and accountability? Policies driven by quotas instead of evidence and expertise ultimately compromises our national security and public safety. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bronco?
Good afternoon, Chairman Corman, Ranking Member Padilla, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Alejandro Barranco. I am a proud Marine and the son of Narciso Barranco. My father was violently attacked and detained on Saturday, June 21st, 2025, in Santa Ana, California, while working a job he has held since the 1990s. He was surrounded by masked men who did not identify themselves, never presented any type of warrant. Terrified, he ran. They chased him, pointing a gun at him, pepper sprayed him, and eventually tackled him to the ground and kicked him. After he was handcuffed, these men held him down while another beat him repeatedly in the neck and head area. After all of this, they then threw him in the back seat of an unmarked vehicle. Growing up, my father was always working from sunup to sundown. He always did his best to provide for our family, even if it meant working 7 days a week and extremely long hours. We always had food on the table, a roof over our heads, and clothes to wear to school. He always taught us to be good people and try our best to give back, respect this great country, and be thankful for all the opportunities we would have growing up in America. Before I continue, I want to make clear my views and opinions do not reflect those of the Marine Corps. I was the first in my family to graduate high school and eventually go to college, a dream come true for my parents. While in college, I would keep asking myself if I was doing the best I could or if I could maybe do more for myself and my family. That's when I looked into joining the military. I joined the Marine Corps out of the love I have for this country and continue to bring honor to my family name. When I told my dad I was going to enlist, he cried with pride. He told me to give it everything I had because we do anything and everything to give back to our country. I deployed to Kabul in 2021 to support the evacuation, standing with Marines who made the ultimate sacrifice. I helped carry their caskets home. Today, both of my brothers are also serving on active duty. My father tells everyone, all three of my sons are Marines. He is so proud that he raised sons who wanted to serve. My brothers and I are a reflection of who my father really is, a law-abiding, proud, and patriotic man. My father has no criminal record and should have never been treated with the dignity. My father has no criminal record and should have never been attacked by these people. My dad is a human being, but he was not treated with the dignity he deserved. He has always made sure to do his best in giving back and supporting this country just like we all do. That is who he is. That is who our country punched, threw in detention, and is trying to deport. What I saw in the video of that day broke my heart. Since my father was detained, it has been a nightmare for my family. He was held in a cage with 70 to 100 other people, one toilet, no shower, no change of clothes. People were in work uniforms because they were literally taken while trying to do their jobs, supporting their families and community. When he went to another facility, Adelanto, conditions were still grim. He went 14 hours without water. The plumbing failed. Dirty blankets made people sick. When he finally got a hearing, the government attorney arrived unprepared. If we didn't have a lawyer, we wouldn't have even known he had a court date. My father was eventually granted bond and came home, but the trauma of that day and the brokenness of this system remains in our hearts. My father is an outstanding member of the community and should have never been attacked the way he was. These people had no warrant for him and had no reason to chase and beat him. He was working his job, which he has had over 30 years. I believe my father was racially profiled, which led to a lot of stress and mental trauma for everyone in my family. We have received an overwhelming amount of support from everyone in the community, from our neighbors to councilwomen and members of Congress. This kindness is the country I know and love. But I also know this is not the only case in which officers have crossed the line and ignored all types of training in how to detain someone. I do believe that the vast majority of the undocumented people in this country are here to work and support the country as well as raising children like my brothers and me. In fact, an estimated 1 in 12 U.S. residents are either undocumented or live with an undocumented individual. Among Latinos, it's 1 in 3. I'm here today because I want other people who've had family members like my dad taken away to know they are not alone. Thousands of families like ours are being ripped apart, and their stories matter. I want this committee to understand the human impact of immigration policies on this administration. I want them to know that the people being ripped from our communities are hardworking, honest, patriotic people who are raising America's teachers, nurses, and Marines. Deporting them doesn't just hurt my family, it hurts all of us. It makes our communities less safe, less prosperous, and less resilient. The current system is broken. Cruel and indiscriminate raids are tearing families apart and punishing hardworking people who contribute to our communities every day. My father, like so many others, deserves a fair chance to stay in the country he calls home. This country is better because of people like my dad. It is time our policies reflected that. Thank you.
Dr. Veliz.
Chairman Garland, Ranking Member Padilla, and members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. My name is Giovanni Veliz, and it is my honor and duty to be before this committee to provide testimony on community policing and safer communities for all. I'm a retired police commander with over 30 years of law enforcement. I have served in various critical roles in task forces in the United States Drug Enforcement Task Force, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, and police commander of the Special Crimes Investigations Division, and more. My years of experience have shown me time and time again that reducing crime in partnership with communities reflects years of sustained engagement, trust building, and open communications. This supports both effective public safety and the safety of honorable sworn police officers who have taken the oath to protect communities with due process and dignity. My testimony today reflects my personal views and experience and does not reflect the official positions of the Minneapolis Police Department. As a patrol officer, I recognize the profound value of community relationships. By actively engaging community members and local business owners and attending countless meetings, I gain insight into the community's needs and concerns. I was privileged to be welcomed by immigrant families and community leaders into their spaces, where I listened to the stories of dangerous journey into the United States, stories of hardship, resilience, and a yearning for safety and opportunity. This family often expressed fear of crime and reluctance to contact law enforcement. These fears have been shaped by past experiences with abuse or unjust justice systems. I learned much from these encounters, and they compel me to reflect on the value of providing voice to the voiceless and treating every individual with dignity and respect. In the response for the call for stronger relationships with the immigrant community, I led initiatives in partnership with the community stakeholders, including the creation of a multicultural advisory committee and the development of educational workshops. These workshops reach thousands of families, teaching them about police services and engaging them to build trust with police officers and help reduce crime in their neighborhoods. The trust and cooperation generated through these efforts led to critical public safety outcomes, including information in major drug trafficking investigations, the rescue of a kidnapped community member, the apprehension of suspects in shootings, and successful large-scale fraud investigations involving organized crime in Minnesota. I respectfully share my concern that increased local law enforcement involvement in aggressive and fear-based raids of immigrant communities is already eroding trust, cooperation, and public safety in our neighborhoods. When residents fear law enforcement, their willingness to report crime, cooperate with investigations, or assist and identify violent offenders is diminished. The erosion of trust not only undermines crime prevention, but also places both officers and community members at a greater risk. Trust between law enforcement and communities we protect is vital and can only be achieved through community cooperation. Without community cooperation, police agencies across the country will have a difficult time identifying and apprehending violent offenders. This will more likely create risk for both police officers and community members. Today, I offer this testimony grounded in my experience as a law enforcement leader, a scholar, and lifelong advocate for justice and community partnership. I urge this committee to fully recognize the dangerous consequences to public safety these aggressive tactics present. I also urge you to work together with community leaders and public safety experts to rebuild trust and to continue to keep our community safe. Thank you for your service and leadership.
Thank you, Dr. Veliz. We'll start with a round of questions, 5-minute rounds, and as you can see, due to conflicts, a number of our members have other commitments and aren't able to be here in person, but I know Senator Padilla and I will have some questions, and perhaps others will join us along the way. Ms. Vega, like Ms. Nobles, you've shared with us a painful experience in your life. Most people don't know exactly what you had to do during the incident that resulted in your son's death and the wounding of your husband, that is holding a gun against the perpetrators to defend your family. Nor do many people understand the lasting impact on your children as they witness the death of their father or grandchildren, their father before their very eyes. You mentioned flashbacks. Are you still dealing with the effects of that incident today?
Yes, sir, I am.
How so?
It's horrible. I need to stay busy around the clock because the minute your head hits that pillow, everything plays out over and over, and you can't stop it.
Now, Ms. Vega, I think some people wrongly suggest that the Hispanic community in this country are somehow opposed to enforcement of our immigration laws. And I think it was Sheriff Boyd made the important distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. To be sure, legal immigration has been one of the secrets to our success as a nation of laws. But illegal immigration has been an unmitigated disaster for so many families, including the Hispanic community in Texas and elsewhere. So your family came to the United States legally. Some of our colleagues here and others you heard in the news say that, well, people can break the law and come to the United States illegally, but because they've been here a while, they ought to be able to stay and should not be forced to return home to get legal status. Do you agree with that?
No, sir. They've had ample time to rectify their citizenship status. It's an honor being in this country. When you're from another country and you come here, it's an honor.
Ms. Nobles, what are some of the worst things reported in the news about your daughter's death that you want corrected for the record?
A lot of A lot of it is they confuse the terms, immigration and illegal immigrants. We're talking about illegal immigrants who have broke the law. Kayla did not live with Walter Martinez. He was put there without their saying in anything. Also, the whole thing about that illegal immigrants commit less crimes. How do we know that? We don't know who's in this country. They have not been vetted, background check. We have no identification of them. We have no idea who they are. They're not in the system. We were really lucky to get a conviction from Walter because they checked and he was not in the system. They had to try to find out who he was by calling Border Patrol, getting his name and his date, and they had to call El Salvador to get any information about him. Nobody knew him. He wasn't in the system, no fingerprints, nothing. We don't know who they are. We don't know who's coming here. And we don't know what crimes they committed because they haven't been caught. We were lucky that he was caught. And the ones that we do know of, they actually got caught. There's no way of knowing because they can live under the radar. They can live in the communities. Her murderer can act like a 16-year-old child. I've seen him in the beginning of the investigation. He was sitting there acting all scared and and asking permission to eat. And then in the end, when he got caught, his whole demeanor changed. He sat in that chair and they told him he was being arrested for a homicide. He sat in that back chair. He looked so much older, so much wiser, and he was like, and he said homicide in Spanish. He just sat back and was like, okay. Like that, laughing about it, like it was a joke that he murdered my daughter and just left her on the floor like trash. It was a joke to him.
Sheriff Boyd, it seems like during the 4 years of the Biden administration, the U.S. government outsourced its immigration policy to transnational criminal organizations, otherwise known as cartels. And as part of Operation Lone Star, that task force, I know you have tracked the human smuggling flowchart and also the flowchart of cartel drug operations. But in your experience dealing with the broken borders or the open border policies of the Biden administration, didn't it allow not only the trafficking of children and women, but the movement of drugs and other contraband across the border without any distinction between that and people who want to come here to work and perhaps want to achieve a better life?
Yes, Senator. So what had happened is Border Patrol was basically turned in from an enforcement agency into a babysitting and processing agency. They were tied up on the border actually processing people to get them into this country as fast as possible. Friends of mine in Border Patrol said they would get in trouble for not processing enough people into the country in a timely manner. And what that did was that left our borders wide open for people to come through and to bring stuff through. But I will tell you that during that time period, slave trade outpaced narcotics as far as the revenue that the government was aware of that the cartels made. And so that's one of the problems that we're seeing now is this was not an immigration issue. This was a slave trade issue. These people were brought here by the cartels because we ceded our authority of the border from the U.S. government to the cartels. And they brought those people here and put them into indentured servitude. And I've seen that firsthand. We have imported millions upon millions of people. We have put them in a peon class, and they are now trying to pay off their debts to their masters. They're beholden to workplaces, whether it be in a farm, whether it be in a kitchen, whether it be at the hotel, or whether it be unloading 18-wheeler loads of dope or moving different product or killing people. They are beholden to the cartels to do whatever it is they are told to do by the cartels and their affiliate organizations. And that's a direct result of the last 4 years.
And Sheriff, is it your experience that the only thing or maybe the main thing that the cartels care about is money?
That is absolutely it. And I will touch on one thing that Senator Padilla mentioned about people working in the fields. I don't know if y'all have ever sat down face-to-face with a Sicario in a small room, but I've done it on multiple occasions. Those individuals didn't just kill people for a living. They also worked out in the fields. They were welders helpers. They worked on pipelines. They had regular jobs during the day, and they killed people on their time off for the cartels. So just because somebody works at the local farm or works in some industry doesn't mean they don't have the capacity to do evil and do those things. And so that we need to understand.
And finally, you were part of Operation Lone Star Task Force, and I believe you've supplied us with a couple of charts here. One, a human smuggling flow chart, and one, a simplified flow chart of cartel drug operations. Is that correct?
That is correct. And those are based off of our experiences of conducting investigations.
These will, without objection, these will be made part of the record. Senator Padilla?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the first things I want to clarify, something I keep hearing, not just during this hearing, but for months and months now from the Trump administration, is that they're going after the worst of the worst. That's the soundbite, that's the rhetoric. And their aggressive show of force is accomplishing the goal. At least that's their claim. The way they present it, the way they talk about President Biden's administration and prior Democratic administrations is like it was never a priority for Democratic administrations to go after criminals, and that Democrats and Democratic administrations just didn't care about the presence of dangerous people in our communities. It's simply not true. So I want to help set the record straight. And again, if you can't take my word for it, let's turn to an expert. Ms. Fleischaker, you were in ICE leadership. In your view, in your experience, did the Biden administration ever restrain ICE from pursuing serious criminals? Part B to that question, only because one of the other witnesses implied that the Biden administration was restraining ICE either by policy or by resources from doing its job. True or false? Can you expand on both of those, please?
We absolutely did not stop ICE agents from enforcing the law and going after public safety threats. In fact, we encourage them to do so. We very much want to find and arrest public safety threats in the community.
Well, thank you for that. And anybody on this side of the dais who's familiar with the appropriations process in Congress, particularly in the Senate, given the filibuster rules, knows that spending plans are adopted on a bipartisan basis. So we can discuss and debate the need for additional investments in not just enforcement, but as I mentioned previously, immigration judges, hearing officers, et cetera. In fact, not too long ago, there was a bipartisan proposal on the table to significantly ramp up the budgets for those agencies, and Republicans walked away from that deal. That's a fact. Second area I want to tackle is in the area of indiscriminate enforcement. Just by show of hands, by the way, raise your hand if you think all immigrants are criminals. Let the record reflect, none of the witnesses raised. All immigrants are criminals?
Not all immigrants.
I'm very precise in my question.
Repeat your question.
Raise your hand if you believe all immigrants are criminals.
Are you talking about illegal immigrants, or are you talking about regular immigrants?
Microphone.
Yeah, he's microphone.
All immigrants. I'm using my words very
Are
precisely.
you talking about
Raise your hand.
illegal immigrants
By show of
or
hands.
immigrants who came here legally and did it the right way? Which one?
By a show of hands, raise your
Well,
hand
that's
if you
not,
believe
yeah,
all
that's not going to
immigrants
be
are
a
criminals.
proper answer to that.
Or even most. But
No,
again,
all
those
illegal
hands
immigrants
not-
are criminals because
So
they
I
came
don't
here
think anyone
illegally.
here would disagree with the idea of rooting out the, quote, worst of the worst, even if we disagree over what immigration policy should be. But I believe it's unacceptable that these raids are so indiscriminate that they end up sweeping up people with no history of violent crime. Hardworking people trying to give their children a better life, like Alejandro's father, Narciso. Now, Alejandro, question is for you. First of all, I'm so sorry about what happened to your father and what your family's been going through. Targeting somebody like him does not seem to make the community, the state of California, or the country any safer. And it's an insult to our history of welcoming people who want a better life. Now, I agree, we need to modernize our immigration system to make it more strategic, more effective. Is there anything else that you would like to share about the cruelty with which your father was treated or which your family's gone through?
I think that the way they treated him and the way they handled that situation was very unprofessional. It showed men who were not trained. It doesn't seem like it. They were running with fingers. They were running with guns in their hand, with fingers on the trigger, pointing it at civilian vehicles. And honestly, I don't think that's for the best of public safety. And I believe that they should have better training and go out and chase after the real criminals.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And the more resources, personnel, funding, and otherwise that's directed at, again, just broad-based enforcement is less focus, less prioritization of those violent criminals that we know are out there, the administration knows are out there, but they're not the clear priority or focus. If I may, Mr. Chairman, just one more question in this round. We know that the massive show of force by the Department of Homeland Security has scared people across communities, not just Los Angeles, not just throughout my home state of California, but other parts of the country, to the point that we're now seeing people hesitate to go to work, hesitate to patronize stores, and to visit public spaces, even go to church. So I'm deeply concerned that this fear will also deter people from reporting crimes like domestic violence, sexual assault, robbery, etc. Dr. Velez, you have 3 decades of experience encouraging community members to come out of the shadows and trust you and your officers to report crime, to engage in law enforcement, to improve public safety. You spoke to this a little bit during your opening statement, but can you describe the impact of these indiscriminate raids on the types of relationships that you trained your officers to build with immigrant communities?
Thank you, Senator Padilla, for the question. So under my leadership, Senator Padilla, we spent days, years, weeks. I spent 30 years building trust. Trust is the fulcrum to crime reduction, to the safety of community members, to the safety of police officers. This is an ongoing daily through every single interactions. When the community have the perception that we're involved in immigration enforcement, they are not going to come forward and report crimes. They're not going to come forward and access police services. Thus, what's going to happen is that will increase the percentage for this immigrant communities to be re-victimized by violent offenders. And once again, that will put greater risk for police officers. Community members are the ones who are home in their community 24/7. They are our eyes and ears when we respond and we try to reduce crime.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have additional questions. I'll wait for the next round.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am the newest senator here, certainly the newest on Judiciary, and I am so glad that I am here in this capacity now because I served as Florida's Attorney General and watched in horror as Biden and his handlers and the radicals in charge of his administration systematically and intentionally broke down all of the structures and security safeguards at the border. And it was only through litigation that we were able to uncover documents that showed their plan was in place from day one. In fact, when they started rolling out executive orders dismantling everything that the Trump administration had put into place, they were warned by those in the administration and Border Patrol and DHS that if you do this, we will immediately be overrun. We will immediately lose any control at the border, and we do not have the ability to keep pace with the detention capacity that will be needed. And in fact, ignoring all of those warnings by their own administration, they not only went ahead and issued the executive orders dismantling everything that Trump had put into place, they then asked for less money for detention beds. And the consequences and the chaos that unfolded not only was predicted by their own administration, it put law enforcement at the border at risk. It put families and communities at risk. It put our nation's sovereignty and security at risk as more and more people flooded into this country with previous criminal backgrounds and those that were on the terrorist watch list. And as I pursued litigation, a judge said, Biden and his administration has turned our border into nothing more than a meaningless line in the sand. And when there were warnings that our border would be overrun when Title 42 was expiring, Florida uncovered documents saying that their grand plan was to step back and let it be overrun. And in my litigation as Florida's Attorney General, I uncovered that not only were they pushing more and more and more and more and more historic numbers into our country unvetted, that they established quotas every day to make sure that Border Patrol pushed a certain amount of numbers into our country that was barely vetted. So as Attorney General, when I had sheriffs from all over my state calling me to say that the Biden administration was canceling detainers on criminals in their jails and telling them to release them back into the communities, I was horrified. Horrified not only because I work with law enforcement across the state, and I knew that was doing what that was doing to their communities, but horrified because I knew that went against not just the policies of Republican administrations, but Democratic administrations. It was a radical's wish list. They had changed the entire policy on whether or not we were going to deport serious felony offenders, and their agenda was no. And the resulting crime that occurred across this country as a result was predicted. I predicted from the beginning of this administration, I was one of the first states to sue when they stopped deporting people here illegally that were committing crimes against Americans in our communities. So the gaslighting that started under the last administration when Mayorkas showed up and said the border is secure, and I guess he thought the American people would believe that, it's still going on. There are so many felony offenders that are here illegally in our country that because Biden released them, this administration has to do the hard work of tracking people down and deporting anywhere from 11 million to 20 million people because we don't know who's in this country. On a conservative estimate, 11 million people is more than the population of 42 of our states, and most of those people were unvetted. So you're going to hear a lot about people here that just want a better life. But make no mistake, Biden and his administration purposefully unleashed those here illegally committing crimes on you and on your families, and it was intentional. And when I brought it to their attention that they were no longer even deporting those in federal prisons that were completing sentences that were here illegally, that they were taking them back to where they were prosecuted and pushing them into those districts, like no other presidential administration had done, they fought me on giving me the information, and I had to sue them for that too. So we can have hearings all day long, and I can hear about these stories, but make no mistake, and the American public should not fall for this dim deception. This was intentional, it was purposeful, and they're going to roll out everything that they can think of to stop any sort of progress to shoring up and making this country safe again until they get somebody back in office that will do the same thing. So I appreciate you, Chairman, for standing strong, and I would like to ask Sheriff, I know we have a sheriff with us from the Lone Star State, from your state, and I want to just know if you heard the same thing from people, from sheriffs that were forced because detainers were canceled to release people back into the communities.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Senator. They were forcing them to release people back into the community. And we have had a long-standing partnership with Border Patrol, Department of Homeland Security, and our federal partners. And regardless of what is said, they were not issuing any orders to Border Patrol or to ICE telling them, don't enforce this, don't do that. But what the administration was doing was sending people to those stations and then giving them verbal orders. You're no longer allowed to help law enforcement do this. And much to Border Patrol's credit, they would sit down and figure out, okay, how do we circumvent this order and help them in another way? They would figure out how to help us in a way that they hadn't been strictly forbidden from doing until the Biden administration would realize that they had figured a way around that order. And then the Biden administration would issue a new verbal order to them, tell them they couldn't do that. And they would sit down and figure out another way. So the administration wasn't dumb enough to send out a paper trail. What they were smart enough to do is they were smart enough to send people to those stations and go, you quit helping local law enforcement. You quit taking these actions.
Well, indeed, they held back as much paper as they could until attorneys general like me and others pushed in court and got it and found the documents that showed they knew this was happening their first month in office. They knew we would be overwhelmed, and they did it anyway. And if I just might, Chairman, I am a mother as well, and I just want to say thank you. I can't imagine the loss of a child, but sharing those stories and making sure this never happens again in our country because we can follow the law, we can do what's right. I want to thank the parents that share their stories, and I want to thank every law enforcement man and woman who signed up to wear the badge and stand between chaos and order and good and evil and made sure that this country stands for what we were founded on. And that is the people governing ourselves under a rule of law. And that was so important, and I'm so grateful to them every day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Hirano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we can all agree that our immigration system is broken, both on the legal side, which is we have a visa system that has a huge backlog of people waiting to come into our country, and also we have a lot of undocumented people. And I would like to correct the record in that there are some 11 million undocumented people here. A rather large percentage of them came here with legal visas, and they're overstayers. So these are people who already were vetted in order to get visas to come into our country. So, things are, the issue of immigration is complicated, but we agree that we have a broken system. And I'm glad that when I was first elected to the U.S. Senate, one of the major bills that I worked on as a member of this committee was the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill. And while it didn't have all of the kinds of provisions that I would have supported, it was a good start. It was a good faith effort to address the complexities of immigration reform, and I thought it was a relatively fair bill, so I voted for it. Unfortunately, the House never got around to addressing that bill or doing anything with the bill, and so here we are. The whole issue has become highly, highly politicized. We now have a regime that wants to deport 1 million people a year, if not more. They would like to deport 11 million people. How that is supposed to happen is beyond me, but maybe that is one of the reasons that they are basically moving so much of our law enforcement community, whether it's the DOJ or all of our various agencies, into focusing on deportations. Now, I think we can all agree that people who should be deported are the ones who are violent criminals who have committed crimes. That is not what is happening in our country. So the kind of roundups where the quota or the requirement is that I should arrest 3,000 people a day, see, that leads to all kinds of actions on the part of ICE and the other agencies that they have focusing on deportation and rounding up people who pose no danger, no safety danger to our communities. But it's certainly creating havoc and fear in our communities. So that is what is happening. So rather than working on what I would consider to be comprehensive immigration reform that we can, I hope, all agree on some of the provisions, no, we are continuously blaming the prior administration. Let us not forget that one of the major issues relating to Trump's first administration was the fact that they separated children from their parents and never kept track of who their parents are. And there are some of these children who have never been reunited with their families. And I think that is, that's not the way that we should be conducting our immigration enforcement. So I would say that we should have ICE prioritize violent criminals, people who have that kind of record. That is not what is happening. So I have a question for Ms. Flesher. Am I pronouncing your name correctly, please?
Flyshaker.
Flesher? Yeah. Okay, so last month, on June 23rd, ICE forced a disabled Purple Heart veteran named Sen John Thun to self-deport. He was a green card holder, but his undiagnosed PTSD led to a drug dependency, which is frankly all too common among our veterans. After an arrest for bail jumping in 2009, his green card was revoked, but he was allowed, this is 2009, allowed to stay with yearly check-ins with ICE. So he did that every year. He would come in, and he's been living in Hawaii for the past 10 years, where he's raised 2 kids and cares for his 85-year-old mother, who is in the early stages of dementia. That all changed this year when ICE, under this administration, threatened to lock him up unless he left the country. So he's self-deported. So, Ms. Flesher, does Mr. Park strike you as someone who should be a priority for detention and removal?
I think the issue for me is that when we focus on numbers instead of quality, we end up focusing on people without criminal arrests, people who are contributing to their communities. We need to be focusing on real public safety threats, national security threats, and recent border crossers.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry that my time is up, but you get my, the priority should be to deport people who pose a safety danger to our community. And a huge number of the people who are going through that process do not pose danger to our community. So that is a use of resources that cannot be justified. Thank you.
Senator Graham.
Thank you very much, Senator Cornyn, for having this hearing and all you've done to shed a light on this. This is very helpful for the country and the Senate, I think. Is it Ms. Fleischacker?
Yes.
Okay. Let me just ask you just a general question. How long were you the chief of staff for ICE in the Biden administration?
A year.
Excuse me?
1 year.
Looking at those 4 years, would you say they were successful in terms of border security?
Well, at ICE, I was responsible for interior enforcement. I wasn't responsible for border security. I would say that the people I know worked as hard as they could every day.
I mean, the caseload, how would you rate border security during your time?
I would say border security is very important, and I know...
I mean, how do you think the Biden administration did in securing our border?
I think that there were a lot of people who came during the Biden administration.
Like 11 million. I would say that's not very secure. Mr. Veliz? Yeah, thank you, sir.
Believe, sir, yeah.
Yeah. How would you rate the border security initiatives of President Biden, successful or not?
Senator, I'm here to testify based on my 30 years of experience as a police officer in building trust and creating safer communities. I'm not an expert in providing you with an assessment of the Biden administration.
Well, I mean, just generally speaking, 11 million encounters is a lot, right?
It seems like a large number, Senator, yes.
Yeah, okay. So the goal is to fix that. Mr. Arthur?
Yes, Senator.
How did we go from the worst border to the most secure border in like 30 seconds?
It's all a matter of will. The laws were already in place at the time that President Biden took office. He could have continued the same policies that President Trump had in place when we had a very high level of border security. In fact, even before Title 42 went into effect, the border was secure based upon my 3 decades of experience. But the reason that the border became insecure is because those policies were reversed and the detention mandates that this Congress has put into place were ignored.
So we went from 160,000 encounters a month for 4 years down to a small amount, right?
Deterrence is the touchstone of enforcement at the border, and if you take away the deterrence, people are going to come in. President Trump put the deterrence back.
The only point I'm trying to make is that the people who are criticizing President Trump are the ones that allowed the problem to exist. You'd be the last group of people I would ask advice from about how to keep this thing going in the right direction. So I want the American people to know that President Trump in 6 months has gotten the border under control after 4 years of absolute chaos. So my belief is that as we move forward, we need to make sure that we do so, not to go backward in securing the border. In terms of enforcement, Mr. Arthur, is it important that people get the message that if you come here illegally, you will be kicked out?
Absolutely. Unless there is enforcement, people will be more likely to cross the border illegally. People will be more likely to remain in the United States illegally. Barbara Jordan said credibility in immigration enforcement is simple. Those who get to come in, come in. Those who should leave, leave. And those who are here unlawfully should be forced to stay, or forced to leave.
So clearly some mistakes have been made. I definitely want to fix some people that shouldn't have been, caught up into the system. We need to get that right. But the consequence of backing off on interior enforcement and deportation, do you think it would send the wrong signal and undercut our efforts?
Absolutely. The immigration laws are impossible to enforce in any stage, consular, border, interior, if they're not enforced.
Let's just assume for a moment, which I do, that most of the people coming here illegally are not coming to commit crimes, but a lot of them do. Senator Cornyn spread a light on this. A lot of people dead because of bad immigration policy. Laken Riley, the man who killed Laken Riley, was released because of no detention space, went to Georgia and eventually killed this young lady. So my point is, whatever we do, we don't want to go backward, we want to go forward. And if we change our enforcement policies in the way being proposed, I think we'll lose our gains, and I don't want to do that. Thank you, Senator Cornyn, for having this hearing.
Thank you, Senator Graham. Senator Klobuchar.
Yes, thank you to my colleagues. And I want to start by expressing my deepest sympathies to you, Ms. Vega, and to you, Ms. Nobles, as well as to you, Mr. Villa. And I have always, as Senator Graham knows, because we've worked together on a number of bipartisan immigration bills, unfortunately, they have not passed. They passed through this committee, though, and several of these comprehensive bills had much funding for the border and changes to border security, and I strongly agree that securing our borders and ports of entry must be a top priority. I supported the border agreement negotiated with Senator Langford last year, and we must prioritize public safety, including deporting violent criminals. I have also championed law enforcement efforts, as is well known in this room, whether hiring more police officers through the COPS hiring program, I lead that bill, or funding cutting-edge detection technology to stop the flow of fentanyl at the border. But I also know from my time as the top prosecutor in the biggest jurisdiction in my state for 8 years that it is always looking at how do you spend your law enforcement resources. Yes, border security, but then how do you handle when you're deciding how to deal with people in the neighborhoods and you still want to have the resources there for gun prosecutions for people who are felons in possession of guns, for drug trafficking and the like. And so I do have serious concerns of some of the diversion of resources when it comes to some of these nonviolent people in the communities, the fear and chaos that we've seen wrongfully deporting people, undermining due process and the rule of law. And I'm just going to ask a few questions because we have a vote going on. I was at another hearing, so I apologize. Of Dr. Valise, who's been in my state, and I want to thank him for his work. And I've often said that immigrants don't diminish America. They define America. They are America. And our state is home to people from all over the world. And I have prosecuted people for serious crimes that come from other places, but I also prosecuted people that were born in our country. And I want you to talk just a little bit, your 30-year career in law enforcement. You're known as a bridge builder in our community. And could you talk about the relationships with the immigrant community and how they have paid dividends in the police work in terms of making sure we get the tips that we need to go after people that are committing serious crimes? And if you break down all those relationships, you're going to have what I saw, a guy that thought he could go after a 14-year-old and rape her because she was afraid that she'd be reported because her relative was undocumented. You can't have that go on. You have to have some relationships within the community. If you could talk about this, Dr. Valise.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And police officers, we have a variety of strategies and techniques to deter crime, identify violent offenders. But one of the biggest and most valuable tools that I saw in my 30-year career as a police enforcement is the human value from the community, providing that intelligence information daily. And I recognized right away that I was only working for 8 to 10 hours a day, but community members, they stay there. They live there for 24/7. They are my eyes and my ears, not only for me, for the entire police department. One of the successful stories, Senator, that I saw was, I remember being at home at about 8 p.m. and getting a phone call from a community member and putting the community member's identity and life at risk. The community member provided me with exact information about a community member who has been kidnapped by violent gang members, violent Sureños 13 gang members. And even though we put together a SWAT team, we have technology, conduct surveillance. Thank God that we had this community member who provided with exact information about threats and how to rescue this innocent community member who was kidnapped. Thank you to the work from community members also. We have been able to seize and identify major drug trafficking and narcotics investigations, members from cartels, from organized crime. So in summary, I just want to say that we could not do the job without community cooperation. We could not do this job without trust building in communities.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Clarify just a few things. Ms. Fleischhaker, do you believe that everybody who is all individuals who are under final orders of deportation should actually be deported?
I believe that people with final orders of removal have gone through the legal process and then are eligible for removal, for deportation.
You don't think they should be deported, or you do think they should be deported?
I think that those are the people who can be removed. Those are the people who should be removed.
So there actually are some illegal aliens who should be deported. How about convicted criminals? Should they be deported?
Undocumented convicted criminals, those are the people who I think we should be prioritizing for removal.
Okay. Mr. Avila, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about otherwise law-abiding individuals who violate our immigration laws and come into the United States. First of all, illegal entry into the United States is a crime, is it not?
That's right. We call it EWI, entry without inspection. That's a violation of 8 U.S.C. 1325.
And in your lengthy experience in law enforcement and dealing with the border, is that the only law that people who illegally enter the country violate?
No, it depends how you enter, when you enter, how many times you've entered and been encountered. There's very different types of removal. I think we overuse the term deportation, but believe it or not, most illegals in this country are removed without a deportation order. There's expedited removals, there's voluntary returns, there's many different types of removals. The actual deportations are executed by an immigration judge under that order.
So in addition to illegal entry, is it your experience that many individuals who enter the country illegally engage in identity theft?
Oh my goodness, I conducted so many fraud cases, including Social Security, cards, identity theft. I have a twin sister. She was a victim of identity theft by a female illegal alien while she was in law school. It took her, it was so much time and such a hard effort to gain her identity back that the Social Security Administration actually issued her a new Social Security number, and that's very difficult to do. Many times, we're talking about marriage frauds, passport frauds. I conducted many search warrants where I found many documents, fraudulent documents, where these organizations, visas, and you name it. So yes, especially in the employment capacity, where these employers are denying knowledge, and they hide behind that when they say, well, the illegal did provide me with an actual Social Security number or an ID. It happens to belong to someone else or someone that doesn't exist altogether.
And do individuals who enter the country illegally and engage in identity theft or perhaps have forged Social Security cards and the like, do they typically comply with other laws like federal tax laws and other laws? Or, in other words, my point is that is there such a thing as a person who enters the country illegally who does not violate any other laws?
No, typically there's other violations of law that sometimes the Democrats refer to as civil infractions or civil administrative, and that's, I think there's a big confusion between the criminal violation of law versus the civil violation of immigration law. The Democrats seem to convolute it and make it into one, which is very, very different. And they commit a lot of different criminal and civil violations amongst after they come in, whether failure to have even drivers or vehicle insurance, things like that, right? That matter in my state of Texas, why our rates are so high, emergency room costs, many other economic impacts throughout the U.S.
Dr. Feliz, I certainly respect your public service. Thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, though, based on your testimony, I was wondering, do you believe all laws should be enforced or just some of the laws?
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, in my 30 years experience as a police commander, working the streets, working in with federal task forces, I always focus on the most violent offenses, violent offenders. My team and I were involved in hundreds of felony criminal investigations ranging from drug trafficking, weapons, and shootings.
And we appreciate your service, as I started out by saying, but the question I have is, do you believe that all laws should be enforced or just some laws?
Either laws are passed by legislation, law enforcement has the discretion to enforce those laws. And I personally, I prioritize enforcing the most violent offenses, make sure communities are safe.
Don't they frequently, in your experience in law enforcement, call that selective prosecution? To just go after some cases, but not other cases of similarly situated persons who violate the same law?
Chairman Garland, I saw it as discretionary powers of sworn officers that I have, the discretion to select the most violent offenses and focus on the most violent offenders in the communities.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a vote on, so I'm going to turn the mic over to Senator Cruz here momentarily. I just want to thank all of you for being here today and offering your testimony, and again to Ms. Nobles and Ms. Vega. If you have our condolences. And I think we've had a test case between what happens when you enforce our immigration laws, which we've seen under President Trump, and what happens when you don't enforce the immigration laws on a uniform basis under President Biden. But I thank all of you for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. For 4 years under Joe Biden and the Democrats, this country witnessed an invasion at our southern border. It is an invasion that has no precedent in the history of our country. 12 million illegal immigrants were allowed to come into this country. And that was deliberate. It was not an accident. It was not negligence. It was a deliberate choice that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Alejandro Mayorkas and every Democrat senator and House member made. They looked at 12 million illegal immigrants and they saw what they believed would be future Democrat voters. And they were willing to allow Americans to be murdered, American women to be raped, American children to be brutalized by violent criminals day after day after day. In his first 71 days in office, President Biden released 184,241 illegal immigrants. That was a decision. By the way, it was a lawless decision. Federal immigration law says they shall be deported. No president has ever done what this administration did, which is say, we don't care about the law. We are all about partisan politics, and we're going to let them all go. And God help the communities we release them into. His first 71 days, Joe Biden averaged 2,600 releases per day. Let's compare that to the same 71-day period in 2025 under President Trump. Joe Biden, 184,241. Donald Trump, 9. Not 9,000, not 900, 9. That is a 99.995% reduction. At the State of the Union address, Democrats did something else unprecedented. They decided they wouldn't stand for the president. They wouldn't applaud for the president. The only thing they would do is emanate hate and rage for the president of the United States. So Alexis Nungary was at the State of the Union address. I've gotten to know Alexis well, the mother of Jocelyn Nungary, a beautiful 12-year-old girl raped and murdered in my hometown of Houston. The Democrats sat there and wouldn't applaud for the mother whose baby girl was taken from her. President Trump at the State of the Union address said last year Joe Biden stood before Congress and said he could not secure the border unless Congress passed new legislation. And as President Trump pointed out, it turned out we didn't need new legislation, we just needed a new president. You look at gotaways. Under Joe Biden, over 3 million gotaways. Who are gotaways? They're the most concerning of all of the 12 million that came into this country, because gotaways are the illegal immigrants we know were here. We see signs of them. We see tracks. But they didn't turn themselves in. Gotaways are much, much more likely to be murderers, much more likely to be rapists, much more likely to be child molesters, much more likely to be gang members, much more likely to be terrorists. Under the Biden administration, CBP was instructed at the southern border, be on guard for Hamas and Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists coming across the border. Why? Because they've declared jihad, and because the Biden open border policies extended a red carpet for anyone that sought to do harm. Now, if you look at what the Trump administration has done, it didn't just slow the bleeding, it turned it around. Daily border encounters down 93%, encounters with gotaways down 95%, illegal alien crossings down over 99%. These are historic, the biggest improvement in border security in the history of the United States of America. And yet, not a single Democrat is here celebrating that. Not a single Democrat is saying, thank you that our families are safer. They don't want our families safer. The Democrats have decided instead to fly down to El Salvador and have margaritas with MS-13 gang members. I genuinely don't understand that. Find me a community in America, find me a mom in America who says, you know what we need? More gang members who are raping more little girls. And this crisis is not about numbers, it's about lives. Laken Riley, a beautiful 22-year-old girl, in Georgia murdered by an illegal immigrant the Democrats released. Jocelyn Nungary, as I mentioned, a beautiful 12-year-old girl in my hometown of Houston, murdered by 2 illegal immigrants the Democrats released. They had them in custody. Her murderers were in custody. The Democrats released them. Her murder was in custody. The Democrats released them. Rachel Marin was a mother of 5. Raped and murdered by an illegal immigrant the Democrats had in custody, and they released them. Over and over and over again. This was deliberate. And they're not alone. Border Patrol agent Javier Vega Jr., gunned down by Los Zetas gang members. ICE Special Agent Jaime Zapata, ambushed and murdered by cartel operatives. Kayla Hamilton, strangled to death by a member of MS-13. Their families are with us today. I want to say thank you. Thank you for having the courage to tell your loved ones' stories. And I'd like to just end by giving each of you an opportunity. Mr. Avila, I want to start with you, and then Ms. Nobles, and then Mrs. Vega. Tell this committee and tell the American people a little bit about Javier and Kayla and Victor. Mr. Avila.
Senator, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity. Every time I have the ability to speak publicly, I will always honor Special Agent Jaime Zapata, who was assassinated next to me.
Yeah.
He died serving the country. He died defending our homeland for everyone, not one side of the aisle or the other. But what I've continued to do in my life after I retired is, and my concern is about public safety. It's about national security that affects our entire community. I don't want anyone to be a victim of a crime. No one. But I cannot tolerate not one murder, not one DUI, not one theft or one rape from a person that is in this country illegally. We have enough in our country, enough of crime, and it's very difficult for me to accept that the Democrats always put the victims last. Let's not forget the victims.
Mrs. Vega, would you tell us about Javier, please? Yeah, please turn your microphone on.
Thank you for having me here. You know, I feel like you've known Harvey. You've been with us from the very beginning. You supported us. You've put our story out there. And you're compassionate, and I see that in your eyes, and I appreciate that. I also want to say that we do not, as angel moms, we do not do this for the publicity. We don't do it for the spotlight. We do it because we know the pain, and we don't want any other family suffering the pain that we've suffered. We're not supposed to outlive our children. I stop by the cemetery every day, and I visit his grave. But I miss his voice. I miss him sending me flowers. I shouldn't be the one taking flowers to his grave. I shouldn't be the one fighting for all this. But I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop till my last breath. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. Mrs. Nobles, would you tell us about Kayla, please?
Kayla just started her life independently. She worked very hard to become independent. I don't know if some of you know, with autism, they overcome behavioral issues. They overcome a lot of stuff to be productive, and she was being productive. She had jobs. She celebrated her 20th birthday. I remember her counting down her birthday. She loved her birthday. Mommy, I'm going to be 20 in a few days. Are you going to, and then I'm like, I know, don't remind me. She celebrated her 20th birthday with her JoJo Siwa cake. And 3 days later, she was murdered and strangled and left on the floor like trash. I didn't know no one prepares you for that phone call. And when I found out it was a known MS-13 gang member, I was angry. How in the world can that come into this country, that monster enter into our country? And I made it that day when I learned to continue on the path to bring justice to Kayla and also for the safety of others. Nothing prepares you on burying your child that hadn't had a chance to get married, have children, and she just bought a car before she was murdered, and nothing prepares you for that. And I'm gonna continue fighting for Kayla and for others and the safety of others, because we do not know who had come across the border. They were not vetted and background checked. And another thing is, how many of those UACs that came across the border were gang members? We don't know. And also all those children that were lost and given to, just given to any sponsor, any group home, how do we know that they were safe? I've always said from the beginning, I was concerned with also the children, who they were giving those children to. They allowed her murderer to leave the sponsor's house. He left. They did not say or do anything. 3 months after Kayla was murdered, when he was going to high school and Child Protective Services, ORR filed a missing teen report on her murderer 3 months after she was killed. Did a sponsor say anything? I don't know. We don't know if the sponsor said anything or what happened. I think they were just trying to cover their butt because they knew that that Walter killed Kayla. And then they were like, oh, well, we better report him missing.
Yeah. Well, let me say to each of the witnesses here, thank you for being here, but especially Mr. Avila, Mrs. Nobles, Mrs. Vega, especially thank you for being here, and thank you for not only sharing your pain, but making clear these are real people whose lives were taken and they didn't have to die. They shouldn't have to die. And your government failed you. And I want to apologize on behalf of politicians who made decisions that I will never understand and that took the lives of your babies. The record in this hearing will stay open for 1 week for members to submit questions for the record.
Senator Cruz, I see you're moving towards adjournment of this hearing. I know Senator Cornyn, as chairman, had a chance, a second round, to ask some questions. As ranking member, I'd appreciate the opportunity to do the same and offer a closing statement as well.
Okay, have you voted in this vote?
Not yet.
Because there is a vote open, and I think they're calling.
I'll try to be brief. And in that case, let me forego the questions and just suggest to the witnesses also a thank you for your participation today. I will follow up with some of you with additional questions for the record in writing, and I'll just touch on some of the topics that I wanted to get to. First of all, the impact of these arbitrary quotas. We've heard 3,000 a day to 7,000 a day, detentions, arrests, deportations. If you do the math over the 4 years, you're talking about anywhere from up to 10 million people, right, that would be deported. That's nearly the entire estimated undocumented population in the United States. So that doesn't jive with me as strict focus on dangerous, violent criminals, let alone the investigative process that goes behind each and every one. That's been my argument all along. I agree, let's focus on the dangerous, violent criminals, but when we're implementing these enforcement actions so indiscriminately, it's actually diverting resources and attention from that and from other critical missions as we're moving personnel from other agencies within DHS and Department of Justice and even Department of Defense nowadays. A couple things that I think are important to clarify because of the rhetoric I keep hearing about immigrants and crime as if every single immigrant is a criminal. 70% of people ICE is arresting and booking have no criminal convictions. Again, this is ICE statistics. Of the 30% of them who have some sort of conviction, a significant portion of those offenses come from traffic violations or, yes, immigration offenses. Immigration offenses, not dangerous, violent crime. For those who want to talk about the investment by the Trump administration in immigration enforcement and crime, the president's 2026 budget requested cuts salaries and expenses for the FBI by $545 million, the DEA by $212 million, the ATF by $468 million. And if that wasn't enough, the Department of Justice Organized Crime and Drug Enforcement Task Force program, the very one that helped arrest El Chapo, would lose its entire funding and would be shut down completely. So, look, I share this because this hearing, I think, is representative of how difficult it is to have a substantive, constructive conversation about immigration in Congress today. I do think that behind the scenes, there's a lot of members of this committee, of the Senate as a whole, of Congress as a whole, that would like to see progress being made on modernizing our immigration laws. We're all in agreement of the need for a safe, orderly, humane border. We're all in agreement that we need to modernize the system because it has become so problematic. But as we begin to discuss, as we begin to debate, far too often, one side tries to pigeonhole the other as, well, they just want open borders, they don't want to arrest or deport anybody, and the other side is pigeonholing as all illegal aliens are criminals. The truth is much more complex than that. And our response has to be more thoughtful than a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing in committee hearings and on the evening news. If we want to be informed, let's be informed by reports like that from the National Bureau of Economic Research that shows the comparisons between crime rates and recidivism rates by immigrants versus natural-born citizens, for example. I'd like to submit it for the record. If this was just about resources for enforcement, by the way, you'd figure the problem would be solved between the Trump administration claiming, hey, crossings at the southern border are next to zero, problem solved, mission accomplished. And by the way, the budget reconciliation bill has a huge infusion of resources for ICE. So if the problem is solved, let's move on to the modernization of our immigration system. We can and must work together to address that. And that's not just people on my side of the aisle saying it. Last month, we saw Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas lead 5 of his Republican colleagues on the House side in calling on the Trump administration to, quote, start prioritizing violent offenders rather than wasting resources on immigrants with no criminal records. Earlier this month, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise even helped intervene after an Iranian immigrant who had been living in the U.S. for nearly 5 decades was arrested, acknowledging the fact that there are undocumented immigrants here who have committed no crimes. Leader Scalise conceded, quote, we will have to change law in Congress. And that means both parties are going to have to come together to do it. So yes, there is a path forward for this subcommittee and for this Congress to reevaluate and refocus on what everyone agrees on. We should prioritize detaining and deporting violent criminals. But we should also be working together to support our immigration courts, not stand by while mass firings of immigration judges are happening, because just throwing money at enforcement alone will not fix the problem. It will only overwhelm the system. We should work together and not stand by while the administration decimates our refugee program. And just as Leader Scalise implied, we have to be able to protect these long-term residents of our country who have lived and contributed here for decades and who deserve a path to citizenship. My sincere hope is for this subcommittee to drop the theater. Being loud doesn't make you right about everything. We have to come together and get serious about bipartisan solutions. I'm ready to do the work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you again to each of the witnesses. The record will stay open for 1 week for members to submit questions for the record, and the hearing is adjourned.
We are fortunate to have someone like Senator Ted Cruz who laid it out and apologized on behalf of the incompetence of the prior administration that led to the rapings, the killings, the maimings, the murders of American citizens, while their perpetrators were held at one point in time by demon rat attorneys generals, district attorneys, different office holders, and judges who released them. Laken Riley should still be here. Kayla Hamilton should still be here. Jocelyn Nungary should still be here. And then you have the audacity of someone from California like Senator Alex Padilla to seriously ask a question. You think all immigrants are criminals? To hell with that, sir. And to hell with your colleague, Senator Adam Schiff, who is likely guilty of mortgage fraud. Wow. California, I'm sorry that you have such pathetic representatives in all forms and levels of your government. Stuff that really grinds my gears. As you heard from the law enforcement officer testifying, you have 8 U.S. Code 1325, U.S. federal law addressing the improper entry of aliens into the United States. It specifically covers illegal entry and attempts to enter and misrepresentations to gain entry. Let's give a hypothetical here. I'm a news anchor. I'm a host. I'm a reporter. I'm in journalism and media. I ran for state representative in Georgia. If my mother was supposedly guilty of a very serious crime, such as that, or something else that would disrupt the peace of the United States and that was against the law in this country, should she be given sanctuary? Because Fox 11 out in Los Angeles said that about the individual testifying regarding his father. If he was such a patriot, why in 30 years was he still here undocumented? I'm sure a very nice man, and regardless if his sons are United States Marines, we care and thank them for their service. But I could care less that he's a gardener. He broke the law. It's plain as day. It's very, very simple here. And you have demon rats who are prioritizing and trying to spin the narrative and who cannot even address Ms. Vega and the other witnesses regarding the losses of their children, of their family members. It's disgusting, quite frankly. And I have to give credit where credit's due. At least Senator Klobuchar of Minnesota did address Ms. Vega, also addressing Tammy Nobles, who lost her daughter, Kayla Hamilton, saying, I'm just so very sorry, my condolences. The only Democrat on that subcommittee to do so. But she was with Senator Cruz. They co-sponsored the Take It Down Act, a different issue. But when it came to those who were profiled online and had their images shared against their will, some people actually care in Congress. And if Senator Padilla wants bipartisan solutions, it's time to be serious about this. And you don't badger witnesses saying that, do you believe all immigrants are illegal? What a ridiculous thing to say. Remember in 1995, President Bill Clinton said we are a nation of immigrants, and we're also a nation of laws. I would hope the Democrat Party chooses to go back to that of the 1990s, to actually want serious bipartisan consensus. They clearly don't. As we conclude today, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee holding a hearing on Biden's border betrayal, and that's what it was, via the auto pen and Alejandro Mayorkas. And we are a nation of liberty and justice for all, and may justice come upon the former administration, as it seems like all roads are leading back to Barack Hussein Obama, the auto pen, and the bureaucrats that surrounded them. And before we part today, it's also people testifying like Deborah Fleischhaker, who are deep state individuals who have been bureaucratic in all regards. Serving as the executive secretary, is looking up her background today, and she's claiming that the administration is not working to remove the most dangerous people. I think Senator Cruz clarified that very clearly in the numbers, and by the witness testimony of those who actually work in law enforcement, removing these very dangerous illegal aliens who committed countless crimes. Perhaps Secretary Noam and the President of the United States should look at terminating people like Deborah Fleischhaker just as they did James Comey's daughter, who is still at the DOJ somehow. Still a lot to clean up in Washington, D.C., the swamp. But as it gets close to 5:30 Eastern on the beautiful Washington, D.C., the federal city, we're with you all the way here at RSBN's live desk to cover everything inside and outside of the Beltway, even tough topics like this, even with senators like Alex Padilla, who would still choose to spin the narrative and, quite frankly, humiliate the witnesses and ask such ridiculous questions when they've lost their family members who don't have a court date. They will not return to them until they have their time to go into eternal rest to see the ones they love. These other individuals, they have opportunities to have a lawyer, they have due process, and they actually have had a lot more due process than the J6 prisoners who did not have their Sixth Amendment rights granted to them over the course of years in solitary confinement. The Auto Pen administration is by far the worst in American history. And as President Trump said today when he was meeting with the president of the Philippines, it looks like this web of lies all leads to Barack Hussein Obama. And we'll watch as DNI Chief Tulsi Gabbard releasing all of that damning information. And this is tied right into it. Not having a secure border, literally perhaps treason against the United States, opening it up as they did. Justice will be served, and we'll keep them accountable, right, left, and center here at RSBN's live desk. For all of my colleagues on the right side of history, God bless you. Have a wonderful evening. Hug those you love tight, and we'll see you very soon on Right Side Broadcasting Network.
Hey y'all, it's Silk from the Diamond and Silk Chit Chat live show. Look, don't forget to check me out right here on RSBN Network. Be sure to watch the show on Right Side Broadcasting Network, and I want you to support Right Side Broadcasting Network. Yes, it's imperative that you do so, okay? I look to see y'all soon. Bye-bye.